The rain fell in soft, insistent whispers against the adamantium roof of Research Outpost Secundus, weaving a rhythm that seemed to consciously synchronize itself with the measured, eternal ticking of an ancient chronometer standing sentinel on adept historian Thaddeus Vogel's desk. 6 to 3 Terran years he had dedicated, mind and soul, to the service of the Lexicanum Imperialis. And for 17 of those long years, this small, isolated outpost clamped onto the frontier world of New Ithaca had been both his home and his sanctuary, a fragile bubble of preserved knowledge adrift in the vast, suffocating ocean of ignorance that defined the wider Imperium. Vogel allowed the calming murmur of the rain to coax his thoughts inward, pulling him into the quiet eddies of memory and duty that always flowed beneath the surface. His thin fingers traced the contours of a worn gold band clasped in his right palm, a gift from Magos Demetrius during his apprenticeship, now a lifetime ago, its surface smooth with the passage of years just like his own spirit. Veritas est salvatio, read the inscription etched in high Gothic script, a profoundly dangerous sentiment within an empire where truth was so often the first sacrifice offered greedily upon the grim altar of necessity. Truth is indeed salvation, he echoed silently within the citadel of his mind, as one hand automatically adjusted the small brass luminator, casting its rich, warm amber glow across the cluttered landscape of his desk. The light snagged on swirling galaxies of dust motes dancing through the still air, mingling invisibly with the potent, comforting scent tapestry of the room. The deep, earthy perfume of ancient, leather-bound books, the sharp tang of preservative oils, and the faint, ever-present ozone tang of the electrowords humming softly, their invisible fields guarding his most precious texts against the twin specters of vermin and inexorable decay. Beyond the thick, armored glass of the viewport, the untamed reality of New Ithaca stretched away into the storm-darkened dusk, craggy mountains thrusting upward like the immense, bruised knuckles of some colossal entity buried beneath the planet's hard skin, short tufts of tough emerald-green grass clinging stubbornly to the thin, rocky soil, yielding only momentarily beneath the weight of the insistent evening rain. Far, far away, a mere haze against the oppressive gray, the lonely lights of Hab's settlement Tertius glimmered faintly. A tiny, vulnerable island of warm human persistence adrift in the vast, predatory wilderness of the world. Vogel couldn't help but perceive it, this distant pinprick of faint, battling radiance, as a stark and perfect metaphor for the Imperium itself, a fragile, flickering candle flame, guarded desperately against the howling, infinite darkness of an utterly uncaring cosmos. The old historian lifted his warm cup to his lips, the ceramics scarred and familiar, sipping deep the bitter warmth of the recaf, a small, cherished luxury in this remote posting, one of the very few he permitted himself amidst the austerity of his calling. The powerful stimulant would keep his aging mind honed sharp for several hours, yet time enough, perhaps, to make significant headway into the monumental task of completing today's designated portion of his life's enduring labor, a vast, secret, comprehensive chronicle devoted to understanding Malcador the Sigillite. Spread across the scarred wooden surface, like the treasured artifacts of some forgotten civilization, lay the tangible fruits of arduous decades of tireless research. Cracked data slates blinking with fragmented administrative records salvaged from the dim echoes of the Great Crusade. Pick captures of eerie, half-shattered architectural ghosts on Terra that were whispered to have once housed the very first skeletal offices of the burgeoning Administratum. Transcribed whispers like condemned thought-spurged testimonies from the lips of inquisitorial prisoners whose fragmentary, often contradictory claims of ancestral memories touched the brutal chaos of the Unification Wars. Most sacred of all lay one slim, unsettling volume, bound seemingly in stretched, cured human skin, its surface whispering secrets with every shift of light they desperately sought. Partially recovered journal belonging to an iterator who had, impossibly, allegedly spoken directly with Malcador during the dire. Collapsing weeks just before the siege of Terra gripped the throne world in its apocalyptic fist. The Vox unit hunched in the corner occasionally crackled to life, a sudden, intrusive burst of static gnawing at the thick silence before subsiding into impotent white noise again. Each electronic gasp made Vogel glance up, a brief, involuntary movement that served as a small, cold reminder that even here, Hundreds of light years adrift from the suffocating, whispering heart of the Imperium, he was never truly alone. Once per monotonous month, the growl of a scarred transport ship shattering the planet's silence would herald the arrival of fresh supplies. Perhaps a few precious new research materials wrapped in protective casings, and most critical, most cryptically encoded, the laconic, unsettling instructions delivered by his unseen handlers within the shadowy shroud of the Ordo Malus. These faceless mentors, these mysterious patrons obsessed by secrets, they had commissioned this immense whispering tapestry of knowledge many years earlier, a project already consecrated by the dedicated labor of dozens of historians before him, a lineage that would inevitably, he knew with a scholar's calm acceptance of mortality, be painstakingly continued by dozens more dedicated minds long after his own bones had inevitably turned to ancient dust within the thin soil of this frontier world. The final, compiled chronicle, he acknowledged again with a familiar pang that never truly faded, would never grace the open shelves of the imperial archives, never be scanned by the curious eyes of ordinary, sanctioned citizens trapped within their small spheres of ignorance. It was knowledge gathered with meticulous care, purely for the sake of its own enigmatic preservation. Or perhaps, as Vogel sometimes dared to imagine in his rare, private moments of unsanctioned hopefulness, locked away as a shield or blade for some unforeseen, terrible future crisis. A moment when understanding the concealed nature, the intricate motivations, the very soul shape of the Emperor's legendary, vanished counselor might prove utterly, critically vital for humanity's precarious continuation. A startled gasp of unexpectedly sharp, cold air slithered through an imperfect seal somewhere deep within the Hablock's architecture, causing the parchment he'd meticulously prepared for ink to flutter with fragile alarm like ancient paper wings. Quickly, reflexively, Vogel placed a palm-sized chunk of polished obsidian, cool and smooth under his fingersa plucked solemnly from the tangled twilight ruins that might once have been the foundation stones of a long-vanished pre-heresy, shrinny topped the corner to calm its tremors. The unexpected chill raised thin gooseflesh along his thin, parchmentary arms beneath his plain robe. A visceral, unwelcome nudge towards the ever-present contemplation of his own brittle mortality, the inevitable fading of consciousness into the silent archives of death. Dipping the nib of his worn quill into the shallow depths of the inkwell, filled with a deep midnight blue pigment as dark as a new Ithacan Skya color, arduously derived from the strange native flora, and costing a shockingly exorbitant sum to extract, Vogel merged his breath with the determined focus of his being, and began the intricate dance of fingers and nib, transferring thought to the waiting parchment. The slow, deliberate scratching sound of the quill-tip etching dark blue script into the fiber joined the rhythmic cadence of the murmuring rain and the ceaseless, metronomic ticking of the timepiece, blending together in a strangely profound, intensely personalized harmony of unyielding human purpose. What manner of man was Malcador the Sigillite? He wrote, the elegant calligraphy flowing with the ingrained reflex born of decades upon decades of sacred, disciplined practice, each elegant letter formed and placed with reverence. This singular question has vexed, haunted, and often broken the spirits of imperial scholars since the earliest, grief-struck days emerging from the shadow-darkened aftermath of the Horus Heresy. He paused, the nib hovering just above the page's surface, feeling the texture of the parchment through the quill, and raised his eyes unconsciously to the small, tarnished silver aquila dangling silently above his crowded workspace. The twin-headed eagle, enduring symbol of the Imperium's divine dominion, had watched over his daily labors with its sightless, polished metal eyes for the entirety of his 10 millennia-long service. Did that unseeing gaze harbor silent approval for his obscure devotion to fragmented facts? Or was it cold, immutable judgment poured down upon the impudent scholar daring to pinion the truths of gods? The historian, bathed in the soft amber light, could never truly decide, and perhaps he sensed he never deserved to. From the small, rattling heating unit, nestled precariously in the shadowed corner, came the soft, indispensable hum of ancient technology, a drone bred deep within his bones, stubbornly persevering in its function after who knew how many centuries shaking existence. These deeply familiar sounds, the scent of parchment and ozone, The shifting play of lamplight across dust motes thee all grounded him. Thin roots woven invisibly into reality, connecting this specific, ordinary moment of ink and cold to all the countless mundane hours, the forgotten days, and the hushed nights that had come before it in this sanctuary. The endless span of tense focus, devoted painstakingly to piecing together fragment by fragile fragment, impossibly scattered mosaic of a life, vanished utterly 10,000 brutal years into history's unblinking maw. He thought intensely, momentarily lost, not of the ritual words required by the chronicle form, but of Malcador himself, that near-mythical figure reputed to have stood constantly, unflinchingly in the deep shadow cast by the incandescent emperor himself. Had the Sigillite ever permitted himself pause in his cyclopean labors? Had he ever dared look down into the churning, sanitizatoring void that gaped beneath the staggering weight of responsibility crushing his purely mortal, ancient shoulders? Vogel, dipping his quill again to replenish the vanishing ink, deeply doubted it. In that alone, if in nothing else across the vast gulf, separating a ragged old historian trembling beneath a tin roof on a frontier world from an architect of galactic destiny, Thaddeus Vogel sincerely aspired to honor his silent, vanished subject silently emulating that unwavering, almost inhuman persistence despite the consuming weight bearing down on his own tired bones. Outside, the whispering rain suddenly intensified its assault, drumming against the adamantium shield with a newfound, startling urgency, while the wind inevitably heightened its own unseen force, whistling with sharpened breath around the sharp corners and anchoring bolts of the outpost, a reminder of the planet's indifference. But within the sanctified clump of his study, beneath the peppering rain and the howling vents, all remained calm, meticulously ordered, fiercely purposeful. Vogel wrote unsteadily, his consciousness drifting far from New Ithaca's storm, lost deep within the contemplation of another time, another vastly more perilous tempest engulfing worlds, when the fate of all existence for scattered mankind had rested precariously, terrifyingly, upon the hunched physical frame of a being who outwardly appeared so completely ordinary, yet who had, in the crucible's absolute instant of necessity, proven himself to stubborn endurance much greater than just flesh, greater even than legend. This then, assembled from dust and honor, came his flowing script slowly glowing darker blue as he solidified the thought into indelible words. Sensing the first lines forming the vast story is the chronicle of Malcador the Sigillite, Regent Lord, silent kingmaker, final and unblinking sentinel of doomed ancient Terra, the architect of the Imperium that, through fires unimaginable, endures unyielding to this very day. This is the faithful accounting, inscribed in the immutable archives of history, proclaimed the hero from the historical chronicles of the Imperial Palace, compiled by Adeptus Historicus Quintus Van, Imperial Archives, year 561 M. 41. He paused, drawing necessary breath, the ordered progression resuming. The cataclysmic events of the closing century of the 31st millennium, culminating inevitably in the eternal interment of our God Emperor upon the Golden Throne, are documented with varying degrees of pious contrition within officially sanctioned imperial histories, though multitudes of critical details remain shrouded by the deliberate obfuscations decreed by the passage of deep time and mandated by the vigilant redaction offices of his Holy Inquisition, specifically at the immutable command of the Ordo Malus tasked with guarding the hot embers of dangerous knowledge. The nibs scratched rhythmically, dancing with solemn purpose, less celebrated amidst the parade ground rituals instilled in common citizens, but recognized universally by scholars possessing clearance within these vaulted corridors of forbidden insights as possessing incalculable significance for comprehending the very survival of the Imperium itself, is the ultimate, world-altering sacrifice embodied by Malcador the Sigillite in the terminal, grief-soaked hours concluding the tragedy of the Horus Heresy. Historical records, fiercely protected within the sealed depths of the Imperial Palace vaults, contain irrefutable attestation that during the height of the apocalyptic siege of Terra, when the arch-traitor Horus descended directly unto his battle-barge vengeful spirit, with the maddened intent to confront the Emperor directly, it was Malcador, the Sigillite alone, who ascended the benighted steps and assumed the Emperor's agonizing burden atop the pulsing machinery of the Golden Throne. The sheer universe-shattering significance radiating from this seemingly simple act demands the most profound reverence and cannot be overstated by literate men. It is an undeniable historical fact, linking chance to divine intervention, that without Malcador's self-abnegating willingness to voluntarily endure the throne's tormenting psychic maelstrom, the Emperor himself could not have possibly withdrawn his monumental consciousness to confront his fallen, blasphemous son aboard that vessel of ultimate betrayal, thereby irrevocably ensuring the fate of every living human soul might have already been cast screaming into eternal damnation and oblivion centuries long past. He leaned forward slightly, squinting at the faded pick capture of thorn-like spires labeled Throne Subcontainment, drawing deeper from the well of confirmed fragments. The Golden Throne, so profoundly misunderstood by the vast teeming citizenry as a mere intricate life-sustaining engine preserving our beloved Emperor, was in historical truth originally conceived and constructed beneath fearful secrecy, unbroken as a crucial control mechanism governing the Emperor's secret, transcendent project secreted deep beneath the palatial bedrock explosive human extension into the unreachable. Luminous pathways of the ancient Xenos Eldar webway, teeming with both wonders and terrors beyond imagining. Following the catastrophic psychic message Magnus the Red, acting with tragically misplaced loyalty, yet criminal recklessness beyond ken, projected with such raw force it breached the protective shielding warding the webway project. The throne became not merely essential, but astonishingly critical in breathlessly holding back the ravenous psychic tides of chaos, flooding directly from the malignant warp vastness that instantly, hungrily threatened to drown Terra herself entire. Fragmentary recordings, etched deep within the armored memory cores of the Grey Knight's Fortress Monastery, sequestered upon Titan testify with grim precision that Malcador, despite possessing solely native human physiology absent any bioalchemy, and being burdened by accelerated biological age hanging visibly upon his withered frame, maintained this volatile, agonizing psychic barricade against pure oblivion for a staggering period estimated by cross-referenced chronicalcifications between 7 to 2 and 7 to 6 standard hours, a period immense in its scope compared to the mere moments his handlers had deemed biologically possible. Multiple independent cogitator-linked sources, recovered from disparate locations across an age, brutally confirm that maintaining the corrupted throne functions, beyond a sliver of moments, demands an incalculable psychic outputa crushing, realitus enduring burden that would instantaneously immolate or irrevocably shatter the minds, souls, and living bodies of all, but the most psychically potent, disciplined subjects chosen by the Scalestia Psychana after decades of relentless mental bathyfires. That Malcador, impossibly, endured its perpetual silent shriek for so long, shielding an entire planet from damnation, spoke solely to an earth-breaking capacity, implicitly regarded by Ordo-sanctioned historians embedded deep within the Titan libraries as possessing an extraordinary psychic resonance truly second only to the godlike Emperor himself. When, at the terrible, prophetic hour, the Emperor at last returned bloodstained and broken almost beyond recognition to the shattered halls of the palace, grievously wounded by some unseen horror unleashed upon the vengeful spirit, Malcador was tenderly, carefully removed from the cursed throne that had consumed his flesh. Here the fragmentary testimony etched within neutron-hardened data cores from several vaults chillingly converge in describing the regent as withered beyond simple decay into something nearly unrecognizable as ever having breathed sentient life, while 3 separate accounts preserved under heavy inquisitorial seal explicitly calculate that upon his immediate removal, the Sigillite's seared body, devoid of sustaining power, simply crumbled wholly away to cold. Granular ash dispersed upon the rushing air currents of the failing life support systems circulating within the ravaged throne chamber. This ultimate ashborn sacrifice, this final release of his clinging remaining life force laid directly upon the Emperor's shattered, convulsing physicality, the gesture-whispered fragments indicated, provided the Emperor not with renewal, but with just sufficient fleeting strength bubbling from Malcador's spent soul to issue vast, world-shifting, time-spanning commands, last words reverberating through 10 millennia commands outlining implicitly, and in absolute detail, the necessary restructuring of the Imperium into the unyielding monolith, that would endure through the subsequent 10 millenniums of unrelenting darkness and see humanity clinging stubbornly to survival despite all abysses threatening to engulf it utterly. It was in reverent, heart-touching recognition of this very finality, this self-imposed obliteration sparing no shred of flesh in service, that the Emperor himself, even in his unimaginable agony radiating from the throne, unilaterally decreed Malcador would thereafter, unto eternity, be honored as Malcador the Hero, a title grand in its absolute simplicity and terrifying weight, a pronouncement that, while essential and entirely uncontested within austere echo chambers of official administrative text repositories and the sigils of founding charters, has tragically, bafflingly, diminished into faint echo and crumbled near oblivion within the teeming populaces who know only hymns lavishly celebrating the Emperor's own. Vastly grander yet infinitely more remote sacrifices, eternally unending at the center of galactic devotion. To deeply measure the fleets, the foundations, the warriors, the 10,000 years bought entirely by this solitary act, one must possess. Vogel dipped his pen slowly into the thinning dark blue ink, as if drawing meaning from its very essence, some tangible grasp, however fragile, of who this unique, exceptional individual truly was beneath the shrouds of protocol. Historical shards scattered blindly across millennia, painstakingly assembled and collated by adherents to Veritas like himself, broadly indicate that Malcador served since the tumultuous years of the bloody unification wars, scouring ancient Terra itself, as the Emperor's infinitely trusted, virtually invisible counselor and right hand existing physically beside the throne stone. His legendary, enduring official title of Sigillite, meaning seal-bearer in fractured Proto-Reexpil dialects tracing back to Old Terra's ambiguously recorded pre-unification era, was understood implicitly within trusted circles not merely as formality, but as explicit confirmation holding the immense, unassailable authority to bind imperial sovereignty itself upon planets and primarchs alike beneath his golden, silent gaze. Before recorded history embraced the name by which even titans learned dread, he inhabited whispers as Baldur Mal, a figure fragmented across lore and whispered eulogies, as perhaps the final survivor clinging to existence after millennia through phenomenal psychic talent of the Sigillite Order, a forgotten organization steeped in bloody secrecy during the darkest millennia of Old Night, utterly dedicated not to temporal sway, but solely to the ruthless preservation of fragmented human knowledge, amidst the all-consuming planetary wildfires devouring science, history, and gods alike across unrecorded millennia of its existence. The Sigillite Order's legendary, pounded adamantium sandstone fortress, clinging defiantly to the flanks of Terra's snow-swept Himalayan peaks, shunned by generations, was later, luminously significant, seamlessly incorporated into the deep bedrock and hidden structural joists supporting the imperial palace formation, itself a vast citadel rising above the bones of ancient wisdom. Some within the whispered corridors of the Ordo Malus, perhaps armed with polarized intraluminal scans of fused construction layers lingering mysteriously beneath the palace's angelic spires, even dared suggest this tangible merging symbolized profoundly a physical statement etched deep into the world core itself, how Malcador's concealed, almost geological wisdom formed the very taciturn, impenetrable bedrock and soul steel frame upon which imperial governance itself was erected over centuries, serving directly as First Lord of unruly Terra, and exercising the supreme power of imperial regent throughout the militaristic galaxy-spanning fervor of the invincible Great Crusade. Malcador established with unshakable finality the absolute, labyrinthine administrative frameworks essential to managing the rapid, explosive expansion of the nascent Imperium sprawling across the stars. The foundational Council of Terra, assembling factions warring for resources across his vision. The lethally precise early imperial tithe regulations demanding planetary tribute unto extinction to fuel the Crusade fleets. The crushing civilian bureaucratic structures eventually hardening over centuries into the numbingly colossal Adeptus Administratum, ultimately burdening countless worlds. These gargantuan vital systems were all universally, indisputably traced directly back to Malcador's psychological fingerprints, embedded deep within their founding charter laws. Less publicly acknowledged before the authorized masses, yet confirmed undoubtedly within radiation-scorched sections of the all-knowing inquisitorial archives, sealed beyond 10 meters of plasteel under stone mountains, remained his shadow-shrouded founding of the Officio Assassinorum and Titanic Testament, preserved on secrecy-encrypted tablets, retrieved deep from crippled probes, touching fortress worlds regarding his instrumental decisive role in establishing from shattered bedrock both the radical law enforcement arm of the Holy Inquisition itself, founded to root out latent treachery, still festering post-heresy, and its ghostly counterpart, the legendary Grey Knights chapter warrior monks, steeped specifically in psychic art and terrifying sanctity. Their research fortress world Titan scraped free from its celestial orbit, and conceptually forged with ceremony, enacted deep beneath the palace as humanity's ultimate shielded bastion against the hell-shaped foes mere bolters cannot harm. Evidence rescued miraculously from the long-buried vacuum-sealed personal chambers, designated within fragmented architect schematics as belonging solely to the last Sigillite himself. Documents etched onto plasteel literal millennia before voidfarer governments formed above irrevocably indicate, even allowing for decay, that Malcador was approximately 6,700 standard years, composed of flesh and psychic endurance, by the moment his atoms dispersed, and his consciousness vanished utterly into the throne's ravenous flame, making him, without scholarly dispute, one of the absolute oldest known perpetuals, possessing authentic human genome, ever documented throughout all the vast annals of human record-keeping, spanning star clusters, isolated through warp storms. This staggering longevity, stretching back unbroken across catastrophic galactic history, inherently granted him a rare, dare say unique, perspective upon the long tides of civilization, blessed with vision reaching deep into the shining apex of the lost dark age of technology, descending helplessly into the suffocating millennia-long nightmare abyss of old night, and struggling onwards into the nascent light of eventual imperial rebirth, unparalleled, span long beyond fragile human imagining. While never graced with the Emperor's own comprehensive, galaxy-encompassing prescient futurescite vision, burning him ceaselessly, Malcador's profound understanding of humanity's recurring cyclical trajectories, fragile golden ages, inevitably crumbling beneath costly hubris, into technological darkness, anarchy, horror crushing consciousness again, beneath feet before faint embers rose, once more provided him with desperately needed historical context crucial for shaping humanity's vulnerable infant state post-unification towards a path theoretically capable of enduring beyond its dreadful proclivity towards near-total expiry, repeating over predictable millennia. His verified, ingrained preference for absolute anonymity and operating solely from the deepest concealing shadows ensured inevitably that multitudes of his most structurally critical contributions vanished unrecorded altogether by historians denied vital context. His achievements remained temporal ghosts detected solely through the chaos rippling they inevitably created. Primary sources able to whisper his ghostly influence included forbidden fragments purged decisively from the deeply personal journals of Rogel Dorn recovered during site excavations on Terra thousands of years hence. Passages heavily redacted by unforgiving black ink, yet yanked right out of Vulcan's own personal pyre memorial vault, sealed improbably beneath Mount Everest itself. Scattered shards of testimony, salvaged only through seismic scanning, from immolated tapes belonging to the legendary knights errant assigned, tasks vanishingly small in scale, as historians could detect. Certain sealed accounts, deemed classificatirum intoxicatis, held tightly within the radiation-shielded data vaults, buried kilometers under the Martian surface, by a fractured mechanicus clinging fiercely to unquantifiable secrets hoarded millennia deep. Of seemingly inestimable value came wondrously the shattered remnants known only as the Chamber's Malcador documents, miraculously unearthed in 200M39 during excavation work, penetrating the deepest known sealed levels under Palatia Imperialis rebuiltsome times fractured half-parchments containing perhaps, possibly, minutes written urgently in Malcador's own distinctive, clear-flowing script utilizing pitched syntax and ink markers, unique only to pre-unification palace scribes. These offered scholars tiny, tantalizing glimpses akin to spyglasses peering through temporal fog into his strategic methodology during desperate timescrystallizing, thought processes concerning somber compromises and engineered horrors, unleashed specifically during the terminal phase of the unification and burgeoning Great Crusade years. Outlier cells shielding his vision across decaying worlds. Yet fragments pertaining explosively to the Emperor's contested origins or certain sealed records, labeled only Deus ex anguis salvatoris contingentia maximum sec, were inevitably, eternally judged irredeemably heretical and immediately condemned to solitary confinement within unbreakable graviticide stasis vaults hidden deep within sector legend, locked forever by omnipotent inquisitorial edict. Significantly less reliable, yet culturally fascinating dead ends snared within tangled archives, existed in the form of the collected echoed oral traditions, preserved bravely yet often distorted within certain noble houses, based obscurely on Terra, whose ancestry reportedly traced its roots, with varying degrees of embellishment, back to the hellish unification wars themselves. These impassioned spoken narratives often contained lurid accounts depicting Malcador as Deus ex machina diplomat, gliding into ancestral fortress dromes, overlooking ash plains, suddenly, to prevent faction annihilation through impossible compromise incubated between fog-shrouded peaks. Yet such visceral tales must be accepted by the scrupulous historian wielding the scalpel of doubt with but dripping fragments of trust, approached always at dagger point with extreme caution, as they inevitably contain distortions woven into their emotional fabric, designed consciously to artificially elevate the lineage status-seeking legitimacy amidst rivals choking on poisoned blades. Yet painstaking cross-referencing across multiple surviving noble traditions, plotting fragile lineages meticulously like constellations upon ripped vellum fragments, occasionally revealed surprisingly consistent behavioral patterns aligning directly with confirmed historical pillars, such as planetary decrees, surviving as physical echoes hidden deep within thousand-son chapter chronos. The absolute least reliable sources whispered behind barred doors, deemed archaeologically fragile at best by sanctioned archivists scraping unlighted hive floors, are the popular millennia-old legends embedding themselves like persistent, glowing fungi amongst illiterate lower hive gangs dwelling in Terror's tidal sinks beneath. These wild, half-understood narratives speak fervently of the Ancient One, a figure whose mystique persists vibrantly or wanes depending upon fuel available for story fire within dark corners, where history is follow. Whilst these ever-morphing tales frequently contained fantastical kernels of truth surrounding Malcador's reputed telepathic dissolutions, resolving hive-block rebellion unconsciously, or reversing localized warp intrusions, sealing rifts calmly with psychic ceremony, holding back demonkind for a starving hour. They became hopelessly interwoven over generations of helpless transformation, with devotional stories, specifically tailored to the Emperor's saint canticles, pulsing from blistered loudspeakers above the crushing masses, twisting fact and faith, until the data purity could never hope to satisfy even the most reprobate academician, knowing imperfectly which fragments ever reflected faintly, the actual architect Sigillite walking beneath palace dusk 10,000 years, gone into archive dust. He paused again, aware of a small ache coiling between thumb and finger bone, as he studied the deep cerulean ink of his inscription, drying slowly beneath the chronometers ticking warning that hours, years, lifetimes marched steadily towards oblivion, remembering Malcador enduring until ash against time unthinkable. The scratching quill and the weeping rain resumed their shared symphony deep in the heart of the lamplit fortress on the storm-pelted precipice, above an emerald sea bending low to the wind. The veil between historical fact and religious veneration is particularly thick regarding the Emperor and his closest companions, the Imperial Saints, yet from this tapestry of legend and fragmentary record, the visage of Malcador the Sigillite emerges an individual whose profound influence upon the very foundations of the Imperium remains deliberately shrouded. He was a figure who chose the Emperor's immense shadow, understanding that true longevity for humanity lay not in towering monuments bearing his name, but in the silent construction of enduring systems, vital institutions, redundancies, and protocols designed to outlast any single mortal life, even one as unnaturally prolonged as his. His ultimate sacrifice, the agony endured upon the Golden Throne, resonates as the final, stark expression of a millennia-spanning existence dedicated entirely to service without the expectation or demand for recognition. As Constantine Valdor, first Captain General of the Adeptus Custodes, once observed in words echoed down the ages, the Emperor's light undeniably shone before all, but it was Malcador's hand that so often directed its beam precisely where it needed to fall. This work, then, seeks to illuminate that perpetually guiding hand, to lend substance to the shadow, and thereby achieve a fuller comprehension of the bedrock principles upon which the Imperium of man was laboriously raised. In studying Malcador the hero, we do more than investigate a singular, paragon figure. We dissect the core principles themselves, the concepts of duty, sacrifice, and far-reaching foresight that have tenuously upheld the Emperor's staggering vision across 10,000 years of relentless darkness. It is my considered opinion that grasping the monumental significance of Malcador, and indeed the Sigillite order he embodied, is utterly impossible without first staring unflinchingly into the abyss from which they crawled. That abyss was the Age of Strife, named Old Night in the most ancient and terrified texts, an epoch representing the absolute, catastrophic nadir of human existence. Beginning its suffocating grip roughly in the 25th millennium, and enduring stubbornly until the Emperor began his unification crusades late in the 30th, this era witnessed the systematic dissolution of humanity's stellar dominion, the snapping of bonds between star systems like brittle threads. The descent into this long night was heralded by twin, concurrent apocalypses that choked the galaxy. The first was the terrifying emergence of widespread, uncontrolled psychic mutation within the human genome, shattering societal cohesion with fear and superstition. Clawing at this vulnerability, the second horror manifested. Immense, seething warp storms erupted violently across the void, rendering all interstellar travel and communication an impossible dream for millennia. Now understood to be the birth tremors of the chaos entity Slaanesh clawing its way into existence within the Imperium, these storms effectively imprisoned every surviving human world in crushing isolation. Colonies which had once thrived as proud members of a vast interstellar federation withered, forgotten, succumbing to technological atrophy, crippling superstition, and brutal, endless internecine conflicts. Terra, humanity's ancient cradle, bore perhaps the most grotesque scars of this near-total fall. Archaeological evidence, painstakingly unearthed from beneath imperial foundations, screams a silent testimony to a former glory. Terra, as a world of breathtaking technotopian achievement and harmonious environmental balance. Yet by the late Age of Strife, it had rotted into a malignant patchwork of squabbling technobarbarian states, locked in perpetual warfare over dwindling scraps amidst a world poisoned beyond recognition. Nuclear fireballs, virulent plagues, and caustic chemical rains had scoured the landmasses, transforming once-thriving continents into necrotic wastelands. The colossal hive cities' skeletal structures that would later, perversely, provide the basic architecture for imperial rule stood not as centers of civilization, but as isolated, emaciated fortress states, ruled by warlords whose names are deservedly forgot. The very oceans had collapsed into vast toxic slurry sinks, shimmering with unnatural hues, while the atmosphere was a cloying, corrosive shroud, requiring elaborate filtration systems for basic respiration in many devastated regions. Terra's population, once meticulously regulated, had exploded catastrophically beyond any conceivable sustainable level, triggering innumerable resource wars that only compounded the planetary agony, a vicious cycle of ruin. It was precisely within this suffocating environment of perpetual violence, collapsing infrastructure, and cultural amnesia that the ancient order of the Sigillite revealed its true, desperate importance. Best historical understanding suggests the Sigillite order predated the arrival of the Age of Strife by several centuries, at minimum, founded during the desperate twilight years of the vaunted Dark Age of technology. It was the creation of a prescient consortium of historians, archivists, and cultural preservation specialists, visionaries who somehow foresaw the impending collapse of human interstellar society. The name Sigillite itself draws its meaning from the ancient Terran word sigillum, signifying a seal or signet ring. This served as a stark metaphor for their self-appointed, sacred duty, guardianship. They were the authenticators, the verifiers, the unwavering trustees of humanity's cumulative achievements and identity. Unlike many contemporary knowledge-hoarding efforts focused solely on scientific schematics or utilitarian data, the Sigillites possessed a profoundly holistic vision. Their charter, fragments of which miraculously survived in Malcador's own personal effects and now rest under layers of the highest security, outlines a sacred tripartite mandate: to preserve the absolute pinnacle achievements of human civilization against any imaginable catastrophic event, to maintain the unbroken continuity of human cultural memory across the cavernous divides of potential dark ages, and to diligently reintroduce this preserved, vital knowing when conditions ripened sufficiently for civilization to dare raise its head once more. Evidence, fragmented and debatable, hints that the Sigillites established similar repositories on multiple core human worlds during this period of foreboding. Tragically, as the warp storm slammed shut the galactic gates during Old Night, all communication between these scattered branches vanished utterly. Only the Terran branch, nestled deep within the naturally fortified embrace of Titan itself, the Himalayan mountains, would survive the ensuing millennia of darkness to leave any verifiable trace. The linguistic roots of the name, Bra-Alador, intriguingly point towards origins in the regions remembered now only vaguely as the Middle East or Central Asia, though it remains plausible the name was adopted as a title rather than bestowed at birth. Its literal connotations translate roughly to Abraham the Green or Abraham the Verdant in tongues spoken before the long night, a name possibly referencing his ultimate intended role: the perpetual keeper of burgeoning knowledge, the gardener cultivating seeds for a future spring. According to the perilously rare and severely restricted Chambers Malcador documents, Alador entered the ranks of the Sigillite Order approximately 400 solar years before the absolute peak of the warp storm's shattered interstellar travel, isolating Terra entirely. Crucially, even at this entry point, he had already somehow lived for several thousand standard years. This extraordinary longevity, coupled with the wisdom it inevitably accumulated, rendered him uniquely invaluable to the Order, and his ascension through its guarded ranks was swift. By the time Terra was fully severed from her children in the stars, Alador claimed the mantle of master of the Terran repository. What definitively distinguished him, even amongst this august company, was the etheric power humming within his ancient form. While his raw psychic magnitude paled beside the Emperor's incandescent radiance, collated historical assessments unanimously place Malcador as arguably the second most potent known human psyker in all recorded annals. In certain critical respects, notably the diamond-hard discipline of his will, his unparalleled precision, and his mastery over fine manipulation of arcane, currents his abilities far surpassed even prodigies like Magnus the Red during the centuries of the Great Crusade. This potent combination bestowed upon him an irreplaceable capability fundamental to the Sigillite mission in the perilous centuries ahead. Alador, uniquely amongst his mortal peers, could bridge generations with his own consciousness. He ensured the continuity of both the preserved data and, more crucially, the essential original context and intent threaded through it. While others recorded, he remembered, preserving the living spirit of the knowledge against the inevitable degradation born of desperate reinterpretation and cultural drift over centuries plunged into darkness. The vast repository complex painstakingly carved into the Himalayan ranges had been chosen during the dark age of technology with brutal pragmatism. Geological solidity making it a near-impregnable foundation, natural choke points forming defensible bastions, extreme altitude and isolation shielding it from the ravaging conflicts of the lowlands, and the cold, desiccated mountain air naturally inhibiting degeneration of delicate artifacts. Archaeological investigations, undertaken during the heady expansion phase of the Great Crusade, and subsequently sealed under absolute imperial diktat, revealed astonishing construction feats. The core structures bore the unmistakable signatures of Dark Age technical sophistication, alloys, and compositions unknown in the Imperium, construction methodologies that defied the pitiful understanding of mechanicum, adepts though the Sigillites had expanded the complex relentlessly across millennia. adding layer upon defensive layer. Eventually, it sprawled over nearly 20 square kilometers of rugged mountain landscape, its tendrils boring deep into the planet's very bones. It was less a single fortress and more a multi-layered city of knowledge. Within its fortified confines lay specialized repositories, each a sanctum safeguarding distinct facets of the human experience. The immense Biblia Historica dominated, encompassing historical tomes, planetary cultural records, and literary masterworks painstakingly gathered from across shattered human space. The Gorn served as a chillingly silent genetic mausoleum, containing cryogenically suspended seeds and genetic samples of Terran flora and fauna species that had flickered into extinction during Old Night's grim parade of extinctions. The Mechanicum Vault hummed with latent power, safeguarding complex technical schematics, foundational scientific data encoded on unyielding crystalline lattices, and a perplexing array of artifacts whose original functions were now the stuff of myth and yearning. The silent Galleria Memorae housed treasures, paintings faded but defiant, sculptures capturing fleeting moments of perfection, musical scores etched onto strangely resonant alloys, cultural artifacts deemed crucial to the essence of human identity and aspiration. And finally, the contemplative stillness of the Sanctum Cognitus guarded philosophical treatises, theological explorations, and meticulous records charting the burning ephemera and enduring questions of humanity's myriad belief systems across all its history. Perhaps the most profound demonstration of Sigillite foresight lay not merely in what they preserved, but HOW. Shunning reliance on any single medium vulnerable to technological obsolescence or catastrophic failure, they employed a relentless layering of preservation methods across wildly diverse formats. Shelves groaned under ancient paper codices, data crystals pulsed with trapped light, hololithic projectors sat pristine in stasis. More esoterically still, mnemonic engrams carried compressed knowledge within inert capsules, waiting for the key to unlock them. And most mysteriously, psychically imprinted materials pulsed softly, their secrets accessible only to individuals gifted with the witch sight, ensuring that even as entire civilizations crumbled and rediscovered fire, the core of human achievement could potentially survive. Yet, as the dragging millennia of the Age of Strife ground down on Terra like a glacier-crushing granite, the Order faced existential attrition on primal levels. The terrifying technological regress meant the sophisticated power couplings, environmental stabilizers, and predictive preservation technologies within the mountain fastness became ever harder to maintain. Vital systems faltered, flickered, and fell silent for good, their secrets lost. The ceaseless warfare erupting across the poison lowlands constantly lapped at the mountain flanks. Technobarbarian warlords, driven by superstition, desperation for loot, or sheer nihilistic fury, repeatedly threatened the physical integrity of the incredible fortress repository. The ancient defense grids, relics of the Dark Age, were decaying tatters of uselessness centuries before Malcador attained mastery. Worse than all this, the indispensable human resource, the Order's lifeblood, its scholars whispering over crumbling manuscripts, its archivists meticulously indexing, its guardians standing silent vigil dwindled inexorably. The surrounding world, spiraling deeper into ignorance and violence, grew actively hostile to the very concept of knowledge preservation. Learning became synonymous with weakness or worse. By the desperate nadir of the late 29th millennium, a crushing 5 centuries before the Emperor began his unification wars in deadly earnest, the proud Order of the Sigillite had been reduced to fewer than 100 weary, desperate souls clinging to their purpose. A grim inevitability forced harsh decisions. Outer sections of the titanic fortress complex, millennia in the making, were meticulously sealed and abandoned. All dwindling resources, every scrap of power, every fading breath of the remaining Sigillite, was concentrated solely on maintaining the vital core, repositories the last flickering candles in a vast, encroaching void. Imperial forensic analysts, sifting through dust undisturbed for ages, unearthed skeletal remains near breached secondary gateways, silent martyrs of the Order who had fought and died fending off probing raids from the savagery of the forgotten world below. And then came the final terrible solitude. By the time the nameless warlord history knows only as the Emperor began his first tentative conquests in the radioactive ruins of Terra's past, Bram Malcador stood utterly alone, the last fully initiated master of the Sigillite. He maintained a ghost of an organization, shepherding a small cadre of hard-carved acolytes and stoic guardians drawn from the stoic communities, eking an existence on the lower slopes. Yet these devoted souls were fundamentally different. They lacked the generations-deep training, the innate comprehension, the intricate weave of knowledge passed down master to initiate. The sacred chain of continuity, meticulously maintained for upwards of 5,000 years through the worst darkness imaginable, finally snapped. Malcador was the last torchbearer standing on a crumbling cliff, alone beneath poisoned stars. The inaugural encounter between Bram Malcador and the Emperor of Mankind remains frustratingly shrouded in deliberately conflicting chronicles, obscured by millennia of imperial mythmaking and the secretive nature of both individuals. Chronological triangulation suggests, however, with a degree of plausible certainty, that this pivotal meeting unfolded approximately 798 years prior to the final victory in the Unification Wars, situated squarely within the Emperor's early, brutal consolidation of power in the irradiated wastes once known as Asia. The Terran Unification Memorial, raised within the outer palace complex millennia later, depicts this moment in stylized form. The solitary Emperor ascending the treacherous mountain path towards the Sigillite fortress, though virtually all serious scholarship argues a nascent cadre of proto-custodian guard silently flanked him. The memorial also stylizes Malcador, serenely awaiting the future ruler at the massive, scarred gates. Fragmentary records sourced from the perilously rare manuscripts detailing conversations between the nascent emperor and his earliest, most trusted war consuls capture the profound, strategic depth of their first encounter. It was there, amidst the dying echoes of old night within those mountain halls, that Malcador spoke words resonating across epochs. The preserved transcript fragments record Malcador offering counsel. "You seek to reunite humanity," he observed, his voice heavy with 10,000 years of bearing witness, not merely to conquer its fractured remnants. History whispers caution. Those who achieve such impossible unity are not remembered as mere kings or dictators, but as emperors. Patiently forge that mantle. Rule not simply Terra, but ascend as the Emperor of Mankind. Absolute certainty declares that following this mountainside conclave, Bram Malcador, now adopting the name Malcador, a name of obscured but powerful portent, became irrevocably woven into the Emperor's innermost circle of trust. His encyclopedic knowledge of Terra before the strife proved weaponizable during the grinding unification campaigns, offering vital insights into forgotten subterranean transit networks, the treacherous intricacies of landscapes reshaped by war, the fragmented cultural histories and psychological landscape of tribes the nascent emperor labored to subjugate or assimilate. More profoundly still, Malcador opened the vast, long-sealed vaults of the Sigillite repository to the emperor's penetrating intellect. Scant surviving inventory scrolls from this tumultuous period reveal a systematic, almost frantic evaluation of the preserved hoard. Particular, laser-focused interest fell upon scientific and technological information capable of swiftly tipping the scales of the planetary conflict. Forgotten weapons principles, advanced materials science, potent logistical methodologies. The genetic banks of the Goran repository proved a priceless trove. Samples were carefully extracted and transferred to embryonic imperial biolabs, forming the genesis of projects that would later contribute to terraforming poisoned continents and attempting the painful restoration of Terran ecosystems. The alliance forged that day high in the poisoned skies of old night between these two supremely ancient beings, both repositories of vast, lived experience. Both potent psykers in an increasingly hostile cosmos. Both witnesses to the dizzying height of humanity's former glory, and its crushing, near-terminal fall stands as arguably the single most consequential partnership in the entire annals of imperial history. From their shared understanding, their fused will and divergent yet complementary strengths would crystallize the administrative, cultural, and philosophical bedrock upon which the staggering edifice of the Imperium would slowly, painfully rise. In the decades following their meeting, Malcador began a profound metamorphosis. The last Sigillite, the final guardian of a doomed past, willingly transformed himself into the first Lord of Terra, the foundational architect, straining to build an impossibly vast future. He infused the nascent Imperium with the inviolable preservation ethos, nurtured within the Himalayan retreat, ensuring the empire meant to span the stars, once more would never again willingly discard the hard-won lessons written in its own blood. It is a bitter footnote of inquiry that entire sections concerning dialogues between Malcador and the Emperor, referencing the malignant nature of the warp itself and specific, necessarily harsh actions undertaken by the Sigillite Order during their desperate vigil in Old Night, remain glaringly excised from accessible records by order of the Ordo Malus. Their secrets reside under Alpha Primus clearance, the highest such edict known. The Unification Wars themselves, those brutal campaigns that finally hammered Terra into the rough mold of the nascent Imperium towards the end of the 30th millennium, represent perhaps the most exhaustively chronicled period in standard imperial historiography. Chronicles abound recounting the savage triumphs of the Thunder Legions, the technological marvels cautiously bartered from Martian vaults, the Emperor's own legendary duels with monstrous technobarbarian warlords that shook poisoned continents. Volumes fill the deepest imperial archives commemorating these monstrous struggles and the swift, violent progress they forced upon a shattered world. Yet a stark fact cuts through these abundant records. Amidst the thunder of artillery, the roar of genomodified warriors, and the blinding light of divine sanction wielded by the Emperor, Malcador most often appears merely as a spectral footnote, the loyal advisor, the quiet voice of counsel, the unwavering presence standing just behind the throne. The primary architect of the structures that would bind the nascent empire, his nature forged in 5 millennia of solitary guardianship against oblivion, his very foundational principles driving the imperial enterprise, is reduced to a flickering script in the margins of history devoted largely to loud triumphs witnessed by millions. The thunder of the Emperor's conquests may have shaken the foundations of Old Terra, shattering the fractured technobarbarian kingdoms and psyker tribes that had clawed for dominance in the ashes of the Dark Age. But it was the meticulous, pervasive genius of Malcador, the Sigillite, that transformed these resonant echoes of battle into the bedrock of an enduring empire. Across the grueling expanse of nearly 2.5 Terran centuries, known as the Unification Wars, from the Emperor's victory in the deluge-choked urban canyons of the Indonesi bloc to the climactic, ash-choked ceremonies sealing the Treaty of Mars that bound the Mechanicum in spectral loyalty, Malcador's influence seeped like mortar into every stone of the emerging Imperium. It manifested across 3 intertwined realms: the calculated calculus of military stratagems whispered into the ears of generals, the patient construction of governing frameworks intended to last millennia, and the subtle, often unseen weaving of disparate, war-scarred cultures into a nascent imperial whole. While the Emperor's own incandescent psychic power, a stellar beacon that could sear worlds or mend minds, rightfully cast long shadows within the imperial histories, Malcador's own formidable, though lesser known, psychic talents were instrumental instruments played with masterful precision throughout this tumultuous forging. Unlike many powerful psykers grappling with talents that burned along single, often devastating paths, raw telekinesis, shattering battlements, prescient visions flickering like unreliable candlelight, or the brutal intimacy of thought-draped Malcador wielded a startling versatility, intriguingly defying the established limits. Where telepathic communion typically demanded line of sight or perilous proximity, lest the voices dissolve into psychic static or attract warp predators, Malcador demonstrated the unnerving capacity to thread clear, unwavering telepathic bonds across continental distances. This extraordinary faculty, shoulders bowed under the immense psychic strain, allowed the flawless coordination of intricate military maneuvers unfolding simultaneously across vast, irradiated deserts and poisoned sea basins, lending the nascent imperial forces an insurmountable strategic advantage over foes hemmed in by regional blindness, their command structures hopelessly fragmented by geography and distrust, echoing with fear at an enemy whose commanders moved as a single silent mind across the horizon. Furthermore, sealed accounts, unearthed only within the deepest vaults of the Inquisition, speak in hushed tones of Malcador's unsettling ability to temporarily suppress or cunningly alter memories. This delicate, dangerous art found pragmatic, if ethically fraught, application during brutal diplomatic parleys with stubborn barbarian warlords, enabling seemingly miraculous shifts in hostile positions, achieving peaceful compliance where costly mountain assaults and bloody trench warfare had seemed the sole, grim inevitability. Scholars confined to guarded scriptoriums, their access rigorously restricted, still debate the profound moral abyss this power represented, knowing such manipulations danced on the precipice of soul obliteration. Perhaps most crucially, however, in an epoch trembling under the constant threat of insanity-spawning psykers and the eruption of nightmare entities bleeding from the roiling Empyrean, Malcador demonstrated the potent, reality-weaving discipline required to establish resilient psychic wards, shimmering barriers of thought and will projected onto the screaming Imperium itself. They shielded crucial bastions, nerve centers of command, and nascent repositories of knowledge from warp-based incursion and demonic whispers. As confirmed in early Imperial surveys trembling with terrifying data on local warp instability, these unseen fortifications were vital for coherent governance, buying precious time for the nascent Astra Telepathica and shielding fragile minds in a world where uncontrolled psykers could birth minor apocalypses overnight. What truly set Malcador apart in that era of burgeoning psychic titans figures like the Emperor Radiant with cosmic fire, or Magnus, the red-wielding sorceress, might as naturally as breathing, was not merely the raw wattage of his power, though considerable. It was his sublime control and tireless endurance. Where peers of comparable strength eventually frayed at the edges or succumbed, minds cracking like overloaded glass under the strain or the insidious honeyed promises of the warp, Malcador maintained an icy, unwavering discipline, a mastery of self that endured, unsullied, for thousands of years, a mute testament to ageless intellect married to indomitable will. This extraordinary presence naturally translated into critical battlefield interventions, starkly documented in the fading parchment scrolls and cracked data slates of early Imperial warfare. During the protracted horrors of the Siege of Verton Hold, stalemated for weeks within the irradiated, subterranean labyrinth that honeycombed the Nord Afric fortress, Malcador is chronicled as accomplishing the near impossible. Standing above the carnage, amidst the distant explosions shaking dust from the carved rock walls like deathly snow, his mind split into multiple threads, establishing instantaneous, crystalline telepathic links with every isolated squad commander lost in the pitch-black branching tunnels, mapping their positions against enemy strongpoints felt psychically, and coordinating their desperate movements into a single, synchronized surge. This silent symphony of command shattered defenses and seized the previously unconquerable fortress in the space of a single, bloody Terran day. Similarly, the shattering retreat in the irradiated Caucasian wastes found Imperial forces reeling before a previously unknown Xenos energy weapon, emitting a soul-scorching shriek that liquefied minds and armor. Chronicles relate how Malcador materialized amongst the confused vanguard, a calm figure amidst the dissolving metal and flayed screams, and erected a shimmering, crackling psychic bulwark. This temporary wall of sheer mental fortitude held back the weapon's lethal waves just long enough for guardsmen and space marines to stagger back, regroup, and turn a massacre into a costly but survivable withdrawal. Accounts of the Sigillite directly wielding his powers offensively are rarer, filtered through layers of time and potential censure. Yet, the pacification of the Barren Lowlands stands out. Faced with the intractable, warp-twisted witch judges of Boja, wielding forbidden psychic tech grown from fungal horrors and governed by a hive-mind consciousness that defied conventional negotiation, Malcador approached their representative. When diplomatic overtures crumbled against minds warped beyond reason, he engaged their collective consciousness above the fungus-coke swamps in a swift, invisible battle of wills, a psychic duel fought in realms beyond normal sight. Records describe the air crackling with unfelt pressure, opposing mental fields colliding like tectonic plates, culminating in the sudden, silent neutralization of the enemy's psychic presence and the bewildered, passive surrender of their territory. The fertile agroworld was thus spared catastrophic orbital bombardment, its people preserved for the Imperium without turning fields of grain into fields of glass and charred bone, a stark testament to the value of precision over destruction. As the relentless grinding advance finally ceased, culminating in the Treaty of Mars around 840 M30, the echoes of unification gradually quieted. The Emperor's gaze, foresight already piercing the weakening veil of the warp storm's isolating Terra for millennia, turned irrevocably towards the stars. Preparations for the Great Crusade thundered into life in the orbital docks. It was precisely during this pivot, this momentous shift from planetary consolidation to galactic ambition, that Malcador's unique position was formally sanctified, etched in law and annotated with supreme authority. The monumental decree of regency, preserved beneath layers of stasis fields within the deepest sanctum imperialis of the nascent imperial palace, officially elevated Malcador to the twin pinnacles of state. First Lord of Terra and regent of the Imperium during the master of mankind's absence amongst the stars. The document, inscribed with the Emperor's irreplaceable personal seal, a symbol of absolute mandate granted Malcador scope of command, almost inconceivable. The power to issue binding edicts shaking entire continents, to allocate the colossal resources of a unified planet now straining to become an empire, and to resolve decisions of war and peace binding across all strata of imperial society in matters not explicitly held within the Emperor's direct purview. The sprawling governmental frameworks Malcador had painstakingly assembled from the crucible of conflict were finally forged into a cohesive entity, the Council of Terra. This august body gathered beneath the palace's soaring arches integrated the diverse sinews of burgeoning Imperium military command, planetary administration, economic oversight, the tender shoots of imperial justice, all singularly focused under Malcador's presiding gaze. Yet, perhaps the most resonant token borne by the decree was the Sigillum Imperialis, the imperial seal. Empowered to wield it in the Emperor's very name, vesting his words and decrees with the master of mankind's unimpeachable authority, Malcador's own ancient mantle from a mysterious order became his enduring title, the Sigillite, the formal embodiment of being the Emperor's voice and hand. The necessity was profound. The Emperor, soon accompanied by the recovered Primarchs embodying his martial genius, would lead the fiery forge of reconquest across the cosmos. Malcador would ensure the Imperium forged not just conquests, but institutions and iron skeleton of governance that could hold the galaxy together when the fires cooled. Military victory merely reunited human bloodlines under a banner. Governance, administration, and the slow nurturing of a shared imperial culture would forge those worlds into an entity capable of enduring millennia and weathering the inevitable storms. In his inaugural address beneath the cavernous dome of unity, before the assembled counselors and high commanders, Malcador articulated the foundational principle of his regency, a creed guiding countless generations of Administratum drones. The Emperor conquers with the sword, but we shall govern with the pen. His victories bring worlds into the Imperium. Our labors shall make those worlds truly imperial. This immutable truth that military might and administrative integration were twin pillars supporting the same grand arch became the defining manifesto of the Imperium's nascent zenith. Transitioning from the unification of a single, war-ravaged world to the galactic undertaking of reclaiming millions of lost human settlements was an unparalleled logistical challenge, a bureaucratic undertaking on an almost unimaginable scale. Breathing life into this vision demanded administrative structures of staggering robustness and exquisite flexibility. This Herculean task, the template for galactic stewardship, fell squarely onto Malcador's shoulders, demanding every erg of his preternatural intellect and millenniahind pragmatic wisdom, while the Emperor hunted his scattered Primarch sons across the stars. The critical bedrock for this expansion became the Imperial Expansion Protocols, drafted personally by Malcador. These foundational documents, their fragments still painstakingly restored from moldering archives deep within the Administratum catacombs, reveal the Sigillite's extraordinary prescience addressing problems decades before they manifest in campaign reports. Central to these protocols, shimmering with strategic brilliance, was the formal establishment of the Iterator's Corps. From the earliest tendrils of the Crusade, these carefully selected diplomats, trained orators, and deep-issue cultural specialists traveled embedded within expeditionary fleets. Their mission: soft power conquest through persuasion, fostering peaceful compliance and facilitating the cultural suture of rediscovered human worlds into the imperial whole earlier, more subtly, and potentially bloodlessly than bolt and flame. Archives reveal Malcador took deep personal interest, selectively choosing many founding iterators from among seasoned scholars, tactful ambassadors, and knowledgeable historians who had earned their stripes during the unification cultural campaigns, ensuring the ideological and cultural assimilation essential to sustainable rule was never relegated beneath pure military efficiency. Concurrently, the establishment of the imperial tithe system proved equally vital to crusade endurance. Unlike the grim exploitation that would fester in later ages, this was originally a carefully calibrated assessment tool. Templates still bearing the faint impression of Malcador's personal seal included intricate formulae balancing essential resource extraction quotas metals, thermic power, genetic reserves with foundational provisions for uplifting compliant worlds, rebuilding shattered infrastructure, seeding technological improvements, preserving crucial local knowledge, fostering economic development essential for planetary stability and long-term contribution. It sought not merely to drain worlds dry, but to cultivate them for the imperial garden. Running parallel alongside these engines of integration was the creatioin of the Officio Administratum, the early central administrative engine. Rather than imposing a suffocating monolithic rule, this ingenious framework offered graduated tiers of imperial governance, calibrated precisely based on a world's technological level, cultural compatibility with the imperial truth, and strategic importance within the nascent imperial structure. This nuanced flexibility, demanding astute political reading on the ground, yet producing immense efficiency, enabled the unprecedented, rapid integration of hundreds, then thousands, of disparate human societies without shattering them under imperial weight or fracturing the burgeoning imperial bureaucracy against the rock of diverse infrastructural realities. As the tides of the Great Crusade swept ever farther from Saul's light, breaching the cicatrix maledictum long before its name existed in Terror, the Emperor's physical presence on Terra became fleeting. From roughly 840 M30 onwards, he graced his capital for mere days per Terran year. The Primarchs were his instruments, the galactic battlefields his throne. The systems Malcador implanted now bore full weight, proving their worth in the silent, ceaseless flow of communications, resources, and administrative coherence binding Terra to the ever-expanding front lines. Yet, Malcador's purview during this explosive outward surge extended beyond mere planetary governance. He played a subtle, indispensable role in shaping the character of the recovered Primarchs themselves. These crucial interactions, documented in fragmented diaries, sensorium recordings from council chambers, and observational logs, illuminate Malcador's formidable diplomacy and equally reveal the nascent struggles within the superhuman sons of the Emperor. Most extensively chronicled is the bond formed between the Sigillite and Lemon Russ, the Wolf King of Fenris. After the barbaric giant Primarch was retrieved from that ice-locked death world, the Emperor himself assigned Malcador as Russ's primary tutor and guide into the bewilderingly complex landscape of Terran politics, technology, and history. This bespoke assignment, extraordinary given Malcador's crushing burdens, strongly suggests the Emperor recognized a unique feral intensity, needing gentle tempering with lore and context alongside sheer martial prowess. With patient understanding, radiating an aura almost like ancient rock unshaken by storm, Malcador explained arcane technologies ranging from voxcasters to warp drives, walked Russ through intricate protocols governing interstellar diplomacy and feudal obligations both imperial and legionary, and gently steered the feral demigod's perspective towards the vast galactic tapestry of the Crusade's strategic objectives, subtly shaping aggression into strategic purpose. Observers recorded genuine, almost paternal warmth permeating their exchanges. One offhand notation near Fenrisian diplomatic quarters noted the Sigillite remarking appropriate regulations to Russ, as a patient grandfather might counsel a favored, though headstrong, grandson affection, bedrocked upon profound wisdom and punctuated by moments of stern correction that carried paternal weight. Malcador's interactions varied considerably across the burgeoning pantheon of Primarchs. Archives record cordial but largely functional exchanges with pragmatists like Rogel Dorn, careful negotiations concerned only with quantifiable fortifications, Sanguinius consumed by angelic burdens and frontline charisma, and Ferrus Manus, the Gorgon, whose fascination lay purely in physical creation, and the Forge's certainty worlds easily administrated by formula and satask. Conversely, his documented engagements with Magnus the Red were fraught and extensive, charged with volatile psychic resonance. Their dialogues, often transpiring in shielded chambers humming with warp containment wards, centered almost exclusively on the safe application and desperately needed regulation of psychic potential across the burgeoning Imperium, a philosophical battleground where immense will met immense consciousness. Most revealing are the intricate communications and policy sessions with the architect of Ultramar, Robout Guilliman. Here, amidst projections of population charts and senatorial edifice blueprints, bloomed an intellectual synergy built upon profound mutual respect for the intricacies of sustainable statecraft. Discussions flowed deep into the night, detailing administrative models optimized for efficiency and resilience, infrastructure projects designed for both planetary utility and future expansion, legal frameworks balancing planetary autonomy with imperial cohesion. Many governance innovations, later celebrated across Ultramar and replicated widely, showed clear conceptual debts to administrative systems Malcador had already pioneered and perfected on Terra decades earlier, refined through millennia of practical statecraft. Tellingly conspicuous by their near absence are substantive records of direct interactions between Malcador and certain Primarchs, who would ultimately walk the infernal road of betrayal, particularly Horus, the favored son radiating charisma that masked depths unseen, Fulgrim the blind aesthete, obsessed with perfection, thinly veiling insecurity, Angron already overwhelmed by the nails and apocalyptic fury, and the brittle, obsessed genius Perturabo simmering with perceived slights. Whether this scant trace denotes genuine, limited contact in life, perhaps a subtle strategic distance, maintained by Malcador's ancient instincts, or the merciless scrubbing later, performed during the dark enlightenment of the heresy itself, remains one of the most agonized debates, consuming imperial historical inquisitors endlessly sifting through the ashes of the past. The following narrative weaves threads preserved within the restricted volume Prelude to Betrayal, an inquisitorial historian's analysis, classified to omgilval obscurity, supplemented by fragments from the sacrosanct Librarius Omnes and the controversial, barely surviving notations of the enigmatic Council of Nicaea. As the Great Crusade reached its dazzling apex in the early decades of the 31st millennium, outwardly resonating with unassailable power and manifest destiny, the Imperium seemed an engine of inevitable victory, forging a new galaxy in human steel. Hundreds of expeditionary fleets thrust deeper into the void, hauling dozens of rediscovered human worlds into shocked, wounded compliance each standard month. The legions Astartes, commanded by demigod Primarchs wielding weapons of legend, achieved unparalleled victories inscribed onto cosmic memory. Yet, beneath this gilded facade of seeming invincibility, the quintessential human condition ensured fault lines formed. Tensions simmered unseen until too late. Evidence meticulously assembled whispers that Malcador the Sigillite, positioned uniquely at the absolute nerve center of the Imperium, feeling the pulse of every fleet's struggle. The discontentment of every planet integrated under duress, combined with his remarkable psychic sensitivity, capable of detecting tremors in the warp itself, and tempered by millennia of observing the cyclical patterns of human triumph and folly, was among the very first to sense the gathering darkness beneath the blinding light. His unease bleeds through the carefully neutral ledger entries of the Chronic Imperialis, the painstaking administrative journal meticulously chronicling the Crusade's progress. By 940 M30, over 6 Terran decades before open flame would consume the Imperium, entries conspicuously trend towards Malcador demanding increasingly granular reports on specific expeditionary fleets, singled out not for glory, but for scrutiny. Particular attention fell upon those flag vessels bearing the names Angron and Conrad Kurz. Requests framed as necessary resource analysis allocations or standard compliance documentation duties now appear, in the absolute clarity hindsight provides, as early, diligent intelligence gathering, a silent monitoring of escalating brutality and disturbing rupture patterns amongst leaders increasingly detached from the Emperor's grand vision. More damning than climatological surveys or resource manifests are the haunted, fragmented echoes partially preserved within the warp-sensitive oubliettes of the Librarius Omnis, sealed psychic communications between Malcador and the Emperor. These mental dialogues, crackling with static translated into agonized text, reveal Malcador repeatedly urgently, insistently bringing stark dispatches of horror to the throne's distant attention. Statistics detailing waves of excessive civilian annihilation, staining peaceful compliance actions with rivers of innocent blood. Stark deviations from the meticulously drafted protocols laying the Imperium's foundations. Reports detailing increasingly erratic, paranoid, sometimes outright carnivorous behavior amongst specific Primarchs. Strategic commands faltering into spasms of pointless destruction. The Emperor's responses, when recorded fragments survive at all, resonate with terrible preordained patience, counseling calm, the mysterious long game of the anathema, suggesting seemingly refusing to see the immediate, corrosive danger revealed that such profound transgressions would be addressed personally, during direct consultations with the Primarchs involved, a leadership strategy tragically intended as correction already lapsing into catastrophic denial. The pivotal, soul-searing disaster that threw the nascent cracks into hideous light was the brutal compliance action against the world of Calcus, culminating circa 964 M30 in the infamous eradication of its jewel city, Monarchia. Whereas imperial histories subsequently expunged, or grotesquely, justified the event into cleansing anathema against rampant heresy, the murmurs recorded in darker repositories tell a different tale beneath the charred rubble. The accounts Malcador gathered before the fire fell described the very structures of Lorgar Aurelian's psyche buckling under perceived rejection, the whipping fury ritualized amongst the word-bearers under his command, brewing rebellion long before Erebus whispered treacherous sweet poison. Malcador knew. His warnings trembled at the edge of action, yet lacked the authority necessary to halt the glacial trajectory of celestial vengeance. The primordial annihilator's whispers already burrowing deep into receptive minds, yearning for recognition from a father seemingly fixated solely upon martial glory. The horror reaffirmed the gathering pattern, painting prophetic dread deeper upon Malcador's ancient, weary soul. The architect of imperial bureaucracy saw the foundation stones cracking one by one, the soaring edifice teetering monstrously beneath its own silences and unheeded warnings, moments before the storm broke, unleashed in the poisonous shade beneath the false gilding of victory. The shadows grew longer across the Imperium, even as its borders reached further into the void than ever before, and in those lengthening shadows moved the Sigillite, a figure of profound power and deep disquiet. The incident at Monarchia wasn't merely punishment. It was a coordinated act of imperial will, a brutal surgical strike etched into reality by the joint decree of the Emperor and his regent. The classified disposition ordering the city's annihilation, bearing both the Master of Mankind's seal and Malcador the Sigillite's deliberate countersignature, was more than a military directive. It was a blade honed to excise heresy. Its remit extended far beyond the dust of that single Prosperian city, outlining a chillingly precise strategy to dismantle the intricate theocratic structures the zealous XVII Legion had lovingly raised across scores of compliant worlds. The sheer depth of knowledge embedded within the document, detailing the scope and locations of Lorgar's religious endeavors, whispered of years of meticulous intelligence gathering, an invisible war waged in shadows and communiques, orchestrated undoubtedly under Malcador's meticulous command as the Imperium's spymaster-in-chief. His solemn, unchallengeable presence alongside the Emperor on the blasted plain of Monarchia, witnessing the Primarch Lorgar and his entire legion forced to kneel in prayer to mere destruction amidst the ruin of their sacred city, was a testament beyond words. This rare departure from the cloistered halls of Terra for Malcador signaled the terrifying gravity both he and his master placed on the word-bearer's fundamental divergence. a cancer threatening the Imperial Truth's core. Later, amidst the palpable silence of the Council chambers back on Terra, reviewing the aftermath, Malcador would confide to his select peers that the censure, while horrifyingly necessary, might tragically prove insufficient to steer the Primarch's fervent energies towards productive Imperial ends. This somber assessment, muttered in the cool air of hindsight, proved lethally prophetic. For Lorgar, the humiliation seared not repentance, but a seething void that would soon be filled by the chaotic murmurings of forbidden powers, another spark igniting the tinder of a Primarch's disillusionment. This pattern repeated, a grim echo, at the fractious Council of Nicaea decades later, convening amidst the mounting storms over the use of psychic powers within the Astartes legions. While the sterile pages of official history might forever enshrine the Emperor's ultimate ruling the sweeping prohibition against the legions Astartes wielding their psychic gifts, the true currents of influence flowed stronger in the clandestine maneuvers preceding the grand pronouncement. Malcador, ever the unseen architect contending with the consequences of divergence, exerted profound influence. Transcripts sequestered deep within the secret vaults of latter-founded brotherhoods reveal the Sigillite's critical testimony before that volatile assembly of demigods and warriors. He walked a trembling tightrope, meticulously outlining the potential boon a disciplined psychic cadre could offer the Imperium against the cataclysmic, reality-rending dangers of uncontrolled psychic proliferation. Crucially, and against the prevailing winds of deep suspicion whipped up by Mortarian's palpable phobia and Magnus's potentially reckless advocacy, Malcador championed not universal suppression, but a rigorous, Imperial-sanctioned system of training, indoctrination, and most importantly, oversight. He sought the pragmatic middle ground, the regulated path. Private communiques intercepted and encoded in the days leading to Nicaea detail Malcador's tireless diplomatic efforts, a clandestine campaign to forge consensus for this moderate doctrine among key Primarchs. His warnings were stark, chillingly lucid. An outright ban wouldn't extinguish the psychic flame. It would merely drive it deep into unstable underground networks to flare uncontrollably, without safety measures or oversight, creating volatile vulnerabilities. The Emperor's eventual, absolute edict therefore stood in stark, perhaps ominous, contrast to Malcador's unheeded counsel. Most telling was the Sigillite-specific, forward-thinking proposal, the Librarian Edict. This visionary concept envisaged dedicated warriors within each legion carefully screened, rigorously trained, psychically potent, yet utterly disciplined specialists acting both as invaluable tactical assets on the crushing battlefronts and as crucial sentinels, early warning systems attuned to the subtle corruptions and intrusions leaching from the Empyrean. Though initially dismissed alongside the broader prohibition, this kernel of Malcador's insight wouldn't die. Resurrected in tragic necessity during the ashes of the heresy, the Librarius concept proved essential armor, a vindication of his drowned warning. His subsequent, sealed report to the Golden Throne after the Council's bitter conclusion resonated with profound regret. The suppression of knowledge is rarely preferable to its proper regulation. I fear we have closed our eyes rather than learning to see clearly. The shadows deepened around the Sigillite, a weight settling upon him during the closing decades of the Crusade's illusory glory. Beneath the bland cover of routine administrative oversight, Malcador initiated, authorized, and personally managed a constellation of focused monitoring programs. These weren't benign audits. They were targeted surveillance on specific Primarchs and their legions, flags raised on the burgeoning fault lines cracking within the Imperial edifice. The series of classified compliance assessments, commissioned under Malcador's direct authority and executed by trusted auditors woven into the command structures of expeditionary fleets, scoured beyond simple victory tallies. They meticulously dissected casualty rates, particularly civilian deaths deemed excessive. They evaluated the adherence or deviation in the treatment of populations who had submitted peacefully. They scrutinized the implementation, or lack thereof, of the standardized systems of imperial governance the Great Crusade purported to establish. The patterns emerging were undeniable, disturbing blips hardening into terrifying trends on the reports concerning legions like the increasingly withdrawn and ritualistic word-bearers, the terror-inducing Night Lords, and the brutalist, resiliency-obsessed Death Guard. Parallel to this, The insidiously named Crusade Command Structure Analysis dissected a different malignancy, the burgeoning autonomy of the Primarchs. Compiled from fragmented astropathic bandwidth whispers, stark administrative logs showing declining reporting fidelity, and first-hand dispatches from increasingly anxious imperial envoys and governors, painted a picture of Primarchs Horus, Fulgrim, Perturabo among them operating as near-independent warlords. Their expeditionary fleets were becoming personal fiefdoms, extensions of their will rather than integrated components of a unified imperial military machine. The report's ominous summation crystallized Malcador's deepest fears. This decentralizing trajectory was inherently perilous, inviting catastrophe. Most revealing, however, were the privileged communications, preserved in fortresses of adamantium and steadfast loyalty, passing between Malcador the Sigillite and Rogel Dorn, the Praetorian. In these brutally frank exchanges, stripped of imperial pageantry, Malcador laid bare the specific dreads haunting the halls of the Senatorum Imperialis. The vast ambition blossoming unchecked within Horus Lupercal. The fragile, fractured psyche of Angron, held together by restraints and rage. The dangerous, unquenchable religious mania simmering beneath Lorger's enforced compliance. The escalating, terroristic brutality defining Conrad Kerr's methods of establishing imperial peace. Dorn's responses, ever the loyal son and brother, were measured defenses wrapped around reluctant acknowledgments, a microcosm of the titanic tension between Primarch autonomy, the fiercely guarded independence of the legions, and the nascent, struggling demands of central imperial authority forged on distant Terra. These documented anxieties form an unassailable counter to later revisionist myths claiming the heresy blindsided a complacent Imperium. At the summit of governance, within the sanctified mind of the Emperor's most trusted regent, the possibility, the dreadful potential for catastrophic Primarch rebellion had been identified, mapped, and agonized over. Only the precise, treacherous form and the exact, shattering moment of betrayal remained elusive, veiled in the future's impenetrable murk. The Emperor's unexpected pivot, his withdrawal back to Terra circa 970 M30 to focus on his enigmatic and unexplained grand project, formally elevating Horus to the mantle of War Master, wasn't merely a military reorganization. It was a fundamental rupture in the Imperium's nascent soul. While strategists dissected the ramifications for the Crusade's forward momentum, Malcador's existence transformed into a crucible of crushing responsibility. The warrant of regency bestowed upon him didn't just expand his duties. It crystallized a de facto division of power screaming for resolution. Malcador now held near-absolute authority over the sprawling, immensely complicated civilian machinery of the Imperium, its administrations, its laws, its resource allocation across thousands of star systems. This formalized the burgeoning schism. The Emperor, physically and psychically withdrawn, consumed by his secret work below the palace, reigning over the military and technological future. Malcador, standing in the cold light of governance, presiding over the demanding, fractious now of empire. The formation of the Council of Terra during this crucial epoch solidified this structure, creating a body composed largely of adept administrators and senior officials, explicitly tasked with managing the Imperium's boundless complexities, freeing the Emperor to labor in isolation and the War Master to command the distant, galaxy-spanning battlefront. Yet its very composition, deliberately excluding the Primarchs, etched a festering resentment into the hearts of those warrior deities. The perception grew actively fanned by whispers in prideful command decks across the galaxy that faceless, pen-pushing bureaucrats sheltered on undeserving Terra were usurping dominion over the Imperium, shunting aside the very demigods whose blood and steel forged it. Astropathic logs from this fraught period reveal an exponential surge in communiques pouring from Terra, an overwhelming torrent bearing Malcador's seal, directed at expeditionary fleets now dangerously far-flung. Their frequency crackled with desperation, their content increasingly met with glacial delay or transparently evasive replies, especially from the office of the War Master. Malcador's painstakingly precise directives were increasingly viewed through Horus's lens as interference, constraints imposed upon his total war-making authority by a meddling vizier who'd never commanded a legion. Perhaps the most poignant testament to Malcador's isolation and dread were the psychic messages dispatched like bottled cries into the psychic void beneath the palace. Several, painstakingly preserved despite the maelstrom that followed, carry the Sigillite's stark warnings echoing through the warp. Your sons resent the father's absence and mistrust those who speak in his name. I fear the structure we have built cannot long endure without your visible hand upon the helm. The Emperor's responses, when codified fragments survive, offered cold, distant reassurances aligned with the far future, blind to the storm gathering in the now. And Malcador labored beneath an impossible burden of ignorance. The true nature of the Emperor's grand worked the staggering, visionary, terrifying attempt to carve a human path through the labyrinth of the ancient webway. Shattering mankind's dreadful dependence on the treacherous warp remained as veiled from him as it was from the most junior adept. He managed the daily hemorrhage of imperial cohesion without grasping the rapturous purpose, supposedly justifying the Emperor's near-total absence, denying him the crucial context needed to navigate the deadly political fault lines spreading beneath his feet. That the colossal Imperium functioned at all during these critical, attenuated years, that fleets sailed and tithes were collected, and governors governed, stands solely as a monument to Malcador's unparalleled administrative acumen and indomitable will. He commanded an empire staggering towards oblivion, its foundations cracking, its architects distant or defiant, its guiding light obscured, while he stood alone on the crumbling balcony, the seeds of catastrophe sprouting unseen in the dark below. The first incontrovertible proof of that cataclysm, the death knell of innocence, arrived aboard a gutted, desperate frigate, the Eisenstein, staggering out of the hellscape of the Istvan system, bearing a tiny cadre of shattered loyalists led by battle captain Nathaniel Garrow. Intercepted near the edge of the Sol system by the eternal vigil of the Imperial Fists, they were cocooned in quarantine and suspicion before any word escaped. Malcador himself descended into the sterile prisons and bleak interrogation cells. For weeks, he personally probed Garrow, the stern keeper Euphrates, and their traumatized companions. His methods were exhaustive, calibrated layers of relentless, traditional scrutiny, and the subtle, terrifying power of a mind capable of sifting truth from fear and contamination in the most intimate, unassailable ways. The tale they wove the nascent betrayal, the massacre of loyalists at Istvan III, Horus unveiled was appalling beyond comprehension. Yet Malcador, using every tool honed over millennia, compelled its veracity. The confirmation triggered instant, brutal necessity. Contingency, protocol HERETICUS, ripped through imperial systems like psychic lightning. Communications channels screamed into enforced silence, a total blackout sealing the horrific knowledge within the tightest circle of Terra's besieged command. Astropathic calls, encoded with dire urgency, pierced the warp, summoning Rogel Dorn and his entire VII legion back to the throne world to commence the fortification of the Sol system on an unprecedented, near-impossible scale. Simultaneously, clandestine signals sparked life. Intelligence networks painstakingly embedded within every legion, Malcador's hidden eyes and ears planted years before, were activated, ready to report the first tremors of corruption, the names of the treacherous and the steadfast. Critically and tellingly, the historical chronometers record an unnerving gap of approximately 36 hours between Malcador, concluding his verification of Garrow's account, and his descent into the armored vaults below the palace to inform the Emperor. This pointed delay wasn't indecision. It signaled Malcador possessed, by specific imperial decree, or sustained by unspoken, monumental trust, the unguarded authority to initiate civilization-saving emergency protocols entirely upon his own. Solitary judgment, a terrifying mandate reflecting the unique, impossible burden he carried. From that pivotal meeting, the inexorable gears of Siege Nod Terra ground into war footing. Rogel Dorn, formerly anointed Praetorian of Terra, turned his indefatigable genius solely to transforming the imperial palace into an unconquerable fortress against the inevitable tide of war. Malcador retreated into a deeper shadow, his focus shifting entirely into the abyss, assembling vital intelligence, orchestrating counterstrikes, weaving desperate stratagems to hinder the traitorous behemoth that had awakened. The burning need for decisive, asymmetric intervention crystallized rapidly. One initiative birthed from this crucible of vanished loyalty was the formal, empowered establishment of the Officio Assassinorum. While covert death dealers had always operated in fragmented, localized cells during the Crusade, the sheer scale of the existential threat now demanded an institution, a unified vector of imperial vengeance. Malcador's Charter of Operational Authority, stamped in the fading hope of mid-005M31, brought the Officio Assassinorum screaming into existence, an autonomous agency accountable only to the Sigillite himself, operating on kill orders authorized solely by his hand. Recruiters vanished into the slums of Terra and beyond, plucking aptitudes for specialized murder. Within the deepest, most secure vaults of the palace, training grounds were feverishly constructed, environments meticulously crafted to unlock the lethal potential of distinct clades. The implacable Vindicare firing pinpoint death, the insidious Calidus slipping through identities like phantoms, the unholy resilience of the Culexus antipsychers, the rabid fury of the Aversirs. Their initial targets were surgical, strategic, not the unassailable Primarchs themselves, but the vital sinews holding the traitor forces together, supply convoys evaporating in silent transit, communication hubs exploding without warning, recruitment worlds plunged into chaos, sabotage gnawing at the rebellion's logistical marrow. This doctrine of whispers and knives was brutally, irrevocably altered by the apocalyptic thunderclap from Istvan V, the sheer, soul-crushing magnitude of the massacre, the utter annihilation of 3 entire loyalist legions, and the near-total embrace of treachery by others, demanded savage escalation. In the immediate, stunned aftermath, blood soaking the command hololiths, staining them crimson, Malcador brought together key masters of shadow and execution in the sanctum, known as the Concilium Operatus, a secret war council that would formalize the Officio's supreme directives. The most audacious concept born there was Operation Nemesis, a desperate, coordinated, near-suicidal strike not at edges, but at the very rotten heart of the heresy, the War Master Horus Lupercal himself. Every action Malcador undertook in those desperate, initial months vibrated with the frantic, heartbreaking energy of a man who had foreseen the cracks, battled against the tide, pleaded for moderation, and now wielded the machinery of empire with dreadful, ultimate focus against the cataclysm crashing down. He was the seeing eye forced wide open in the face of oblivion, the architect frantically shoring up a collapsing citadel as the foundations turned to treachery. The weight of 10,000 years presses down upon the knowledge, layers of ritualized secrecy and deliberate oblivion thickening the silence, yet fissures remain through which slivers of truth bleed. The monstrous operation orchestrated against the arch-traitor remains shrouded, its fullest brutality locked away, yet the stark reality of it pierces through, the Nemesis Directive. Its very existence screams desperation, bearing the twin seals, one the crushing gravitas of the Emperor Unseen, the other the stark, practical sigil of Malcador the Sigillite. This was no ordinary sanction. It was a decree that snapped taut the absolute pinnacle of imperial terror, drawing forth blades and poisons and psyker killers from every shadowed clade. Imagine the quiet, horrendous chime as every flavor of sanctioned death sharpened towards a single point, Horus Lupercal. The sheer catastrophic scale, the commitment of every assassin breed to a solitary target, stands not as grand strategy, but as a grim testament to the existential dread Horus inspired a ravening tumor clawing at the Imperium's core, demanding extinction. Behind this consuming dread moved the puppet master. Malcador himself, within suffocatingly secure vaults beneath the palace, hunched over glowing strategic tables. The Sigillite leaned in, bone-weary and ruthlessly precise, alongside the silent, lethal masters of the Officio assassins. We feel the silent coordination, the grim calculations passing between minds hard as diamond. Mid-M31 became the crucible, dispatched as Horus gathered his bloodied strength after the drop site massacre, reforming shattered legions into a sharper, hungrier blade pointed directly at Terra's heart. Though Oblivion missed Horus, Jagatai missing the killing blow, its wake churned with the broken bodies of exalted lieutenants who thought their war master invincible. Far deadlier than the corpses was the invisible constriction. The attempt, brutally close, forced Horus behind walls invisible and tangible. Captains scanned retinues with paranoid eyes, battlefields were approached only under crushing guard, his strategic genius flickering less freely as elaborate security protocols choked his unrestrained command, costing the traitors momentum they could ill afford. That fractional hesitation, that self-imposed cage, bought Terra's defenders precious, gasping seconds Malcador knew were worth oceans of blood. This profound failure-bent strategy, it didn't break resolve. Malcador, ever the pragmatist peering through veils of reality others could not grasp, pivoted the dagger. If the throats of the Primarchs were ringed in adamantium now, then the Officio would bleed their war from lesser arteries. The high-value target remained desirable, yes, but only fools charged the fortress when supply trains groaned ripe for the knife. Future deployments became exercises in calculated erosion, choking supply lines feeding the traitor Leviathans, eliminating lords and captains whose loyalties were slightly lesser steel, introducing whispers and suspicion, tiny cracks spreading like frost on thick ice through the traitor cohorts. This grim, patient, bloody work would define the Officio's grim ballet for the heresy's brutal remainder. Documented in dried ink and fading battle logs, hundreds of clandestine thrusts unfurled. A Casagon Vidi Suppli depot detonates silently in the void. A cunning strategist among the word bearers chokes on neurotoxin mid-exhortation. A Death Guard heavy assault falters inexplicably as engines seize mere kilometers from loyalist trenches poisoned beyond hope. It wasn't enough to halt the grim, rolling juggernaut chanting TNTRA TNTRA as it consumed worlds towards the throne world. But each cut deepened the bleeding, each delay added weight to the traitor clockwork, grinding down its effectiveness, buying the Imperium the barest sliver of chance with lives spent by the thousand. Yet, Malcador's true genius for salvation lay deeper, colder, wrapped in secrecy even from the High Lords gasping towards annihilation. He built not just for the siege, but for the impossible aftermath. Among his most chilling initiatives, birthed in the furnace heat of the war itself, were the Knights Errant. Imagine the psychic resonance of Malcador stepping onto the Eisenstein's blighted decks, piercing through the stunned horror landing with Joan's ragged survivors, his gaze fixing on Nathaniel Garro. The Sigillite saw not just a battle-scarred warrior, but a unique blade forged in the hottest coals of betrayal. Instead of folding Garro back into the dwindling ultramarine lines, the records show a quiet reassignment, a subtle entry, placed under Malcador's own direct command, Agent Primus. This wasn't recruitment, it was anointment wrapped in shadow. Garro's grim orders echoed with profound weight, to find others like him. Not merely loyal, but loyal after gazing into the abyss that corrupted brothers, loyal after swimming through oceans of doubt and betrayal. Ironclad loyalty was the baseline, yes, but Malcador demanded stability chiseled from granite, minds proof against the insidious rot they'd witnessed. Souls ablaze with divinity locked onto the Emperor above all things family, legion, even life itself. So the Knights Errant breathed, bloodied and tested, within a sanctum nestled deep in the palace's eternal night, distinct from the thunderous roar of Astartes drilling and the silent lethality of assassin crushes. Their existence was a discordant whisper. Grants of specialized gear flowed, power armor plates stripped of Legion heraldry, blank slates whispering death, channels encrypted beyond Legion protocols, slicing through Legion codes. Scant, fragmented operational records bleed into our timeline dots on a shredded chart across the bleeding middle years of the heresy. They moved where armies couldn't, slipping behind traitor lines, collapsing bloodied sentinels onto fat transports, plucking loyal warriors surrounded by monsters from desolate helplinets, infiltrating traitor bastions thicker with suspicion than adamantium to gather whispers giving battle plans weight, planting warheads crucial, only high command lost, ending the lives of logisticians and monster makers who kept Horus's nightmares marching. Facing warp-spawn obscenities, making hardened veterans weep and flee, Moloch remains the knife twisting in history's gut. That moon holds their closest brush with apotheosis, targeting Horus himself in a desperate lunge during his ritual at the warp breach. Though ruin-powered fist drove them back, Malcador's hand-picked elites scraped the War Master's shadow closer than Legion's dared dream. The operatives were mere consequences of selection criteria horrifying in their rarity. The Sigillite's requisition, forever locked within vaults sanctified on Titan itself, paints requirements demanding superhuman perfection. Astartes needing not just brute-killing power and undying allegiance, but significant psychic potential simmering beneath conscious command. near-psychopathic mental resilience forging an inner citadel, a core credo of absolute incorruptibility demanding purity deeper than light. Mortals recruited faced trials equally impossible, intellect blazing with analytical fire cutting through hype and smog, unwavering dedication not to an empire, but to Homo sapiens imperius enduring among the stars. That chilling courage Malcador valued the strength to gaze into genuine monstrosity and calmly sign extinction orders without flinching, remembering their own fragility. Rising horror-colored Malcadors hand monstrous. Traitor looms strutted into loyal service. 8 eventual space marines, chosen giants of patriots, made monsters from their bodies, walked paths stained eternally. 1,000 suns psychics who'd witnessed their librarium practice stately brightening. World eaters cracking armor, tested against butchers who were once drinking companions. Lunar wolves carrying nostalgias, crawling with corruption memories. Conflict erupted among loyalist commanders, screamed as Malcador denied their claims, calmer yet heavier. Remnants who saw their brotherhood dissected layer by charlayer possessed insight mere legionaries could not glimpse. Garo became Malcador's invisible hand. Orbital logs trace countless extractions, contested lines, rivers of fire. Traitor overseers forgetting prisoners suddenly vanished. Potential candidates unaware of observation nearby suddenly tight-beamed away long before ceasefires concluded. By M31, its calendars redringing Terra, Malcador held the fruits torn from galaxies' flaming ruin. Commits classified from 1,000 suns, rebuilt amongst them a shattered Marconian. Death guard of Garo's own poisoned temperament, a stoic ultramarine, a word-bearer perhaps clinging faith, surviving world eater's war machine misalgorithm. Federation. Broaden, sister silenced stoic against storm, an iterator navigating ideological ruins, remembrancer capturing kill, and identity blanks registering extreme caution by security autoquills. This assembly stands characteristic beyond mere fanatic brilliance, locating needles across a Milky Way in terminal sepsis, and plucking unknown to peers rendering, said peers, Saints' high commands moving conventional battle groups, maintained seamless ignorance covers another entire fighting cadre secret wars. That solar system quadrant deniable and irreplaceable intelligence collection proved. Indeed, Recollect holds whispered reverence. Core cadre sprouting Grey Knights, legendary Astartes' sanitized souls, guarded realm against immortals walking. How planet-shattering Malcador's creation pulses incomprehensibly heavy once unveiled. This fortress nodded quietly into Saturnine trend, Titan facility. Receiving Imperial mandate bearing ponderous seals, Saturn orbital minimum operational hazard commenced. Cobbled Titan fortress monastery ex nihilo, even before Warmaster votes, burn skies, Terra-confronted logistic undertakings, stagger humanity struggling attritional extraction, lunar Mars-Venus belt operations, hauling laden barges under warp-scolded brine quietus convoy systems, guarded custodian secret escorts, so rare even space marine patrol colossines, salute twilight passes. Content breathes true astonishment. Architectural conception marries apex sorcery technologies, beyond Martian Adeptus scopes bleeding volumes, certain archive designs, traceable recovered Dark Age ingenuity. Others freshly conscripted emperors, own workshop sigils classed Eureka permanent integrated warp shielding echoes, cloaking generator principles, shielding Sanctum Imperial itself harnesses calamity-level psychic amplifiers, sculpted concentrations, capable of anomalies spontaneous solids, breach inmate pens beyond. Sarlacc domain comprehension demons, able shredded muzzle, within energy bands boiling containment, maintaining temporal anomalies. Worst predates before siege defense grid first trenchwork. Malcador dug deep, leveraging eons, possessed old night sciences, probably possessed gods to grant menacity powers. Near direct emperor schematics installed afar without disturbance, their master attends golden throne wages, constant war spirit weaves impossible shield, entire empire rests onto its metal back. Yet more fundamental, seedling Selene fabricates Sane's gigantic knights. Biological isolators atop Titan probed eventually Mechanicus sham-redacted conclusions, M32. Grey Knight genocide differs axiomatic. Core genetics tweaked exonxin manipulations, orienting towards psychonelevated functionality, no known prime helix preceding template. Crucially, core modifications provided supernatural warp antidote properties biochemistry, almost mimicking anathema field emanation effects. Pure creation mechanics veils possibility. God-crafted DNA grafted location, ultrasafe Morg's Emperor's phylacteria, held genuine cellular matter unthinkable gift sacrifice somatic. Absent council peer in genetic conception since geome day creation. Recruitment thresholds demanded impossible youth, sought survivorship probability extraordinary. Malcador constructed holistic dogma scripts melding industry traditional martial pedagogy, neuroexercise palaces, ingramdiscipline halls, combat craft mastery, brutally synchronous adepta-style environments, psychic tutelage parameters, guided stabilization stability trauma protocols, range mastery, very warp-thick trying grounds. Fundamentally revolutionary, abolished 200 standard years ignorance, blind crusade familiarity, downplayed demonic sovereignty. Methodology argument hammered mercilessly. Trukno WL Edge wages war as fearlessly crushing illusions. Lingering lies weak decisiveness. Truth becomes level armory, preventing surprise, generating resolve grinding spirits. Final countdown siege materializing early M31, Sigillite personally gathered 8 truth-saturated learners, Titan cellular foundation non-changeable, still uncorrupted. Utilizing psychic might vapori fluent penumbra lifted moon, wrenching spatial eddies, roasting chunks narrative silencing record logs. Into a pocket fold warp unlikely assault. Titan physically ceased Sol system existence temporal stasis, siege consuming Terra spun unknowingly victorious, outcome tethered around Rottunged angel statue, draping suspiring geomantic energies project stasis, influencing everything. Thus tyrannized Sol system, thundered brutally gatekeeper deserted. Titan fell into silence guaranteed by sigillited magic, accepting destruction, throne world shielded nascent order, to Grimm's ultimate notion. Triumph or treason implicate ordination. Failure future death, dealt and corrupted, made irrelevant preserving lifeboat, weaponry far beyond traitor, under League's bottomless ocean thoughts. Concurrently, mind-pulsing caretaking multitudinous threads, disaster weaving under palace foundations, Malcador drafted intellectually perhaps equally vital idea structure, frameworking future imperial entity. Inquisition embryonic secrecy, nested active blood missions. Over formal birth heresy ashes lies conceptual sand set legs upon foundations laid Malcador himself, while civilization burned around him. Originating precept document Silenceprone Administratum, Hereticus Mandate. Archive SIGMATUS sectorial, not for SHELFTHOGHT, reveals breathtaking foresight terrifying implications. Malcador foresees organism, consciously fractal demanded decentralized rigid autonomy satellite, agents operating standalone jurisdictions, beholden solely Emperor's abstract, will whilst peers eye actions, scrutiny, balancing, oversight prevent authority segment infection, ruin go unchecked headquarter slaughterhouses entire. Neuroindustrial stylistic deliberate antithesis, monolithic bomacinous crusade administration, convention praxis, pathways granting unity fleet assets, irrespective local master tactica, decree quarantine civilian, calls entire regiment, ready alongside Titan Legion request structure binder, code issued, under relic Imperius autocrat serial number. Horrifically controversial inevitability dire state necessity endorsement mandate, literally placed these conjectured agents unlimited resource access installations, intelligence throne specified imperatives required. Power level distribution concentrated segmentation, reflects reality chaos metastasis, demanded solution, malleable invasive cancers, dissolve normal chainbreak orders, carry forbidden truth research credibility. Training those drydock knights, errant mortal nucleus, instantly diversely recruited surreal bibliotheca depths, subterranean palace region cryptologized Sigillite sanctum. Desperation echoed, silently stacks forbidden codices, compromises reputations, lost saint lies suppressed truths regarding primordial chaos, expose recruit histories, events previously classified Imperator command, edited galactic suffrage true irritation watching runations, contagion spreading freely ignorant scientists go mad before admitting heresy, confirmed conversely experienced hands, puzzled puzzle pieces, traumatized assault pre-knowledge reconstruct methodology later, printed ordinary. Inquisitorial Handbook, Noble Brutes Method, Imperial Divination. M31 Eve assisting investigations, behind Loyalist Bulwark defending Horror Spirit. Focus, hunting infiltration, cult significance clouds tangibly present immense. Loyal, sect remnants influencing much engineering subtlety impossible yesterday militias, shifting suddenly suspicious fire patterns. Administratum glitches channeling materials quarantine systems, falling simultaneously region reassignment suspicions, deep board signals enemy, profound spiritual conclusions. Operational independence, mandated Grey Knight spycraft agencies, established protocols notwithstanding joint coordination anti-entitlement policies, could designate threat-level nuance, ensuring humans acted humanely demons, destroyed demonically incapable diplomatic lies, negotiated obstructed. Malcador idea chain, yet cruelly explicitly planned extinction contingency, specifically blocking fracture continuation upon his evident preordained demise. Secure overwritings lay appointed shadow bearers surviving in such situations, auto-triggered appropriate contacts, Titan protocols inauguration new Lord Siddlebrand authority, melodiously instruction interaction, possibility unreachable divine shrine sense, unloaded Schwerpunkt facility access keys, repository data, collected psychomine print comatose keeper, immortally guarding ultimate objectives, abominable secrets regions Xenos race spreadsheets, attack past failures profane technology proscribe. Industry warning traitor bioweapon, traces Geolaka witchbreed, hotspots all relevant assets, to fighting service preserving light among stars, immensely prepared successors, usurped succession document, reflected grim prescience, contained approach actions impossible fighting decisions, employed devastating require immense emotional cold rationality detached playing catastrophe probabilities, viewed exchanges receivers, chosen reports Sigillite conveyed tacit, understanding absolute sacrifice approached. Accepted likely folded integrated countdown thinking final solution, Imperium's continuing existence structures, fighting shell's awareness, inspires deepest gravity ball, anchoring role unthinkable personal toll, watching empire weakening second tight. Thou disguises, that Hiri exhales pressing soul hard, reconstructing fortress new tools, within living hell incandescent sacrifice, golden throne, legend appropriately universal morning candles, Sigillite's quieter forgework pact stabilizing. Institutions preserving institutions functional safeguards, keeping humanity burning Imperium, throughout long war perpetually surviving his monumental contribution, remained subtle self-effacing neglect saints, status prophetically fixing crashing future signaling siege preparation, role, prologue horror dark times, exposes audience established commitment, spanning victory armies defiance, whatever losses ultimately consumed vital self-victory defining Gothic narrative pivots next catastrophe. World flickering hope struggles predetermined noble darkness dominate, occupies total attention tremendous careful thought, maneuvers hills descends crushing momentum, invested across solar system tail shield flickering shell, inevitably breaks covers deeper despair penultimate struggles against impossible heavyweight champion, resist flood consuming throne terminus documented accounts, diversely survived chronicle guards, imperial fists, last stand proof legal stasis adamantium, literally written walls. Monastery King Rogel Dorn monumental fortification, accomplished cities, reshaped mountains tunneled rivers, channeled aggressor, redirect flood ramparts, enforcing became land-built strategic in defense, inescapable conceptual forethought, encompassed critical civilians, secured networks ration distribution system, avoiding early chaotic collapse, reaffirmed token discipline, calmed multiplying fears, common directive synchronously controlled fixed thick especially vital dimension, psychic storm. Anticipated warp breach unleashed primordial enemy, unshielded legions collapse Malcador, ensured layered spirit bastions, reservoir containment, geographic soul traps, guarded telepathic assault, umbrella, overlaying physical shieldome Terran crust, compressed crystal structure antennae divert energy schema, internal natured solutions, Pallada's shield raw exposure passive resonator Magnus, used astronomic and amplifier impossible conditions, held collectively loyal psychers against fractured reflecting. Weak indefinitely absorbs flicker turbulent pyromancer saturated dimensions, warding patterns clear understanding role framework established workload distribution, Dorn deploying legionaries fleets, maneuvering Malcador quietly reassumed responsibility spheres, conducting impressive machine harmony, algorithmically correcting flaw backups, addressing thousands variations, famine interference teleport shut down cellular poisoning, terror cult, silencing epidemic civilian management nightmare. Resources crushing pressures calculus minute required constant, saw raw devastation universes reshaping upon Fulcrum World's Terra besiege plan, integrates utterly joined binding materials, seemingly independent strategies, single overarching gospel hammer-secured terror shields, integrity, saving generations, future descendants. Sigillite closed vital gaps, invisible armor weak point anticipated wasting, commands Horus strategically necessary statutes, right protect immense bleed strategist. Stand stride inevitably horrific progress objectives, imminent crawl bomb, becomes tangible construction specifications, forgotten memory, endure withstand pressure greater mountain men seeking right path blade adversary effort concentrate coordination meaningful. Concluding efforts limitless sacrifice foundation endurance, sure steps following ambassador's hololith, prepares siege imminent approach analyze extensive psychic defensive grid data, patterns predictions simultaneous assaults vector pinpoint. Blanket splash psychic addressed multiplied hive density logistics, starts planning scenario food riots, regenerative efforts dedicated command core, disengage, whichever early as possible irrespective priorities, famine pandemic breaching cordons, cinderasting drone swarms hypotheticals, secured final confirmation, subordinate task, forces delegated planetary administrative zones contingencies, formed unified hierarchy determined, establish survivable bastion impossible confrontation shoes. Assumed legacy worker, realize ultimate significance, slowly crumbling physically retained mental acuity projected formation, commanding pre-service background throughout near-crushing burden contexts, woven seamlessly operations, time-acting lens, refocuses understanding narrative accumulation, quiet maniacal activity, efficient all slots filled preparedness months terms strict focused execution, scaffolding entire civilization, quite literally stage architectures, fighting positions carefully. Constructed accept losses, manage targeted retrenchment doctrine, operating limited specialists, surpass mastermind variety fields, covering smash desperate planet, closely cooperating divine sculptor, creating final necessary vessel, divine architect conflict inference foresight, consistently driven imperative endure transcends battlefield, preserving possibility, tomorrow requiring structural institutions, enduring constant grind attrition dossier, detailed psychological assessment officers. Supplied hierarchy, trusted accurately forecast performance under unimaginable stress laying groundwork tactical response, mathematically superior contingencies, placed heroic legends written besieged labor sigillite, ensured mundane machine rations tech priests, deployed maintain manufactorum capacity, overlooked mortar mix ratios refusal calculate siege duration, redoubled hydroponic seed banks legions, closed storm gates organized internal security purge, nascent heretic cells. Identifying early provided invaluable campaigns, circumferential defenses centuries, needed condensed timescale execution, tasked beyond possible limits, continuously adapting plans unfolding disasters, stabilized collapse critical moments, carried weight impossible burden, silently accumulating significance, cemented framing Operation Nemesis, revealed threat level initiated tactical recalibration Officio Assassins, crippled Horus organizations, Knights Errant screening candidates. Infiltrated recovered found extract terror titan, constructed shielded Grey Knights inception, provided psychic warrior, future inquisitional framework independence peer. Oversight, empowered agent creating repositories, forbidden knowledge Malcador, viewing mortal inevitable structured institutions, function destruction personal ensuring, endurance, beyond sacrifice, emperor preserving whilst framework, ensure Malseer artifact survival humanity, silently consumed himself preparation. Looming final conflict walker, anticipates stroll field understanding gravity contribution, comprehensible extent, acknowledged martyrdom imperial history, overshadowed magnitude accomplishment, lays cornerstones Imperium eternally besieged, endure uncover profound dedication, foresight shared breathing pattern defense alliance architects final hours approaching. The utter desperation that gripped Terra, spiraling outward from the very heart of the Imperial Palace as the despoilers' fleets choked the heavens above, demanded more than walls and guns. It demanded unseen shields woven not of adamantium, but of will and unfathomable lore. And while the cataclysmic impacts of the siege erupted across the planetscape, while Rogel Dorn orchestrated the monolithic agony of fortifications buckling under ceaseless assault, while Jagatai Khan's lightning raids became desperate strikes against impossible odds, while Sanguinius held angelic fury in devastating reserve, a quieter, deeper war raged beneath the palace stones. Malcador the Sigillite gaunt beyond measure, the lines of ultimate fatigue permanently etching his ancient face, became the silent bulwark against devouring unreality. His work, alongside the immense defense of the physical bulwarks, was equally vital. Brick by psychic brick, he fortified the beating core, the Sanctum Imperialis itself, where the Emperor, consumed beyond imagining, battled infinitely greater perils within the shattered cradle of the abandoned human webway. This inner sanctum, a last sanctuary against oblivion, demanded defenses born not of this fragmented age, but of secrets glimpsed from before old night's long shadow, technologies whispered into existence by Malcador's own hand, scavenged from pre-strife ruins he alone remembered. Layers folded over layers, physical barriers, where custodians stood more immovable than granite shields. Psychic wards blazing with borrowed celestial might, arcane teleportation grids humming silently, ready to evacuate the Emperor at a whisper of psychic doom, much like the concealed refuge he had built upon Titan for the nascent knights errant. Even as the Helltide crested over Terra's orbital approaches, staining the skies a woundred from horizon to horizon, Malcador spared vital moments, precious breaths he could have offered for unity. He convened the scattered loyalist titans present. Dorn, grim as the mountains he built his castles upon. Sanguinius, glorious yet haunted, each wingbeat echoing foreshadowed doom. Jagatai Khan, a restless tempori barely contained by necessity. In high vaults choked with the ozone scent of imminent war, maps flickering with confluences of destruction, Malcador navigated the volatile confluence of transhuman wills. He acknowledged the terrifying reality laid bare. Outmatched in sheer numbers, outgunned in void superiority, once glorious fleets lay broken, shredded across the orbital lanes, facing foes saturated with the corrupted potency of the warp, beings unraveling the very substance of existence. Yet, beneath the ashen shrouds settling upon the throne world, Malcador saw not just despair, but pillars upon which defiance could stand, however precariously. He spoke of walls raised by Dorn's immovable genius, walls that could make the traitors hemorrhage lives by the million for each inch yielded. He spoke of the Emperor's light, a beacon still burning fitfully beyond the veil of exhaustion and crippling mental war raging far below their feet, a cold lighthouse against encroaching madness. He acknowledged the rarefied quality of those defenders clinging to those walls, warriors whose broken bodies were harder to break than stone. And above all, he invoked the dark, gloating imperative driving Horus Lupercal the need not for slow strangulation, but for a climactic blow against the Emperor himself, a confrontation Horus had to seek. This singular, suicidal compulsion imposed a time limit even upon the arch-traitor's infinite malice. Yet how to meet this, the strategy fractured. Dorn, the unyielding mason, saw salvation only in holding every bastion of the palace itself. Khan, the storm unleashed, saw weakness to slash and savage beyond the walls before the anvil cracked. Sanguinius, foreseeing millennia of horror should any traitor Primarch slip the net, pled for the ultimate sanction finally, for the blade held ready for gods fallen. Malcador's genius, honed over centuries sculpting empires and shattering monsters, was not to choose one champion, but to bind them all, his truly crucial contribution, weaving these disparate virtues into a single tapestry of annihilation. Let the imperial fists become the unbreakable center rock, immuring the vital organs of Terra beneath mountains of fortifications. Unleash the white scars, those masters of fracture and fracture warfare, the essential fluidity to slash where the shell grew brittle, to burn the siege lines from within, to force expenditure where the traitor host could have laughed at it. And forge the blood angels, under Sanguinius' terrible grace, into the last hammer held back from the anvil's teeth, until a Primarch must be met, weaponized despair brought to bear on an ascendancy of oblivion. And deeper still went Malcador's foresight, etched by the terrible clairvoyance of ultimate responsibility. Command chains clarified for apocalypse. Who took the god crown when optimism lay dead? who guided blind legions if the architect of walls fell, who struck down the abomination unleashed if angel fury was extinguished. These protocols, encrypted into adamantine vaults within strains of discourse and urgent missives, scribed by shaking hands on crumbling parchment, written into the very command logs flickering in black bunkers, became the ghost leaders in the cataclysm moments to come, when screams drowned vox generals and primarchs and captains disappeared beneath tides of violation. Then, as the final, crushing descent of troop landers began churning Terra's stratosphere to poisonous clouds, Malcador sought each warrior lord in those fleeting, heavy silences before the universal clamor swallowed all individual thought. To Dorn, the Sigillite delivered cold wisdom steeped in the Elzatim of sacrifice. "Wars protect," the Wyrx whispered, his voice rasping through the dimness of Dorn's warroom, thick with dust and foreboding, not merely through the strength of masonry or steel and blood, Rogel, but through the sacrifice they represent. Understand this crux. Every life spent, like every block laid, must rest precisely where it must. The fortification exists only as strong as its weakest component. The army only endures as long as its sacrifices are deliberate, calculated, necessary. To mourn the sacrifice is human. To falter in where you place it is defeat painted with tears. They place their lives within your design not for themselves, but for all who breathe beyond these walls. Direct that sorrow into clarity. Direct it. To Sanguinius, confronting visions that stained his perfect feathers with dripping premonition, Malcador offered neither facile denial nor grim validation. What passed between them shimmered in the presage gloom surrounding the angel, a tension almost tangible. Malcador neither shattered the prophecy of golden wings, ripped to shreds, nor promised escape from fate. His words, fragments lated preserved by traumatized remembrancers observing the angel's suddenly stilled countenance afterwards, offered a pivot of terrible perspective. The manner of one's curtain fall, sanguinox, stains the soul, yes, yet ruin transcends the individual ending. What apocalyptic horror might your fall prevent? What future might it purchase from annihilation? Consider less the finality of sacrifice, and infinitely more on what it purchases for those left holding the broken fragments of existence. Let that necessity arm your spirit against despair's whisperings, not the denial of destiny your foresight grants you. When the weight suffocated Jagatai Khan with the frustration of unused speed, the stallion god chafing at restraint while planets burned, Malcador's counsel slapped like a challenge spoken flatly, cutting through the air clotted with the Khan's impatience. "Through velocity, Kagan," Malcador had declared, eyes like chips of ancient ice under the Khan's fiery glare in that generatorum's thrumming shadows, where restless bikes tempted the impatient, is revealed not in ceaseless motion, but in the perfect stillness that anticipates the crucial fracture. The ultimate strike finds its mark only when the eye sees the fleeting, unguarded aperture, when the warrior sees not just where, but when the blow will crack kingdoms. Restraint is your blade's sharpening stone now. Preserve the lightning for the instant of vulnerability, the nanosecond when the dam breaks, when speed reshapes fate, not merely wounds giants. This calibration extended even to Constantin Valdor, first of the 10,000, golden guardian beyond reproach, who held temporal authority over the Warden Strange being the core of existence. Malcador drew him aside under the intimidating gaze of the Aquila dominating the Palatine egress, and to this demigod of war sworn utterly to one man alone, he delivered their shared, inexpressible burden in precise, unflinching terms. Our final duty, Constantinus, Foscus's beyond triumph vanquished, or the ignominy of defeat, should bombardment obliterate every stone of the imperial dream we raised willingly amidst a galaxy aflame. Should legions shatter and the palace fall to rubble, crushing the history we authored together. One enduring constant must persist beyond absolute ruin. The Emperor yet strides amongst us. Permanence absolute and guaranteed above all possibility. My final sacrifice, if it comes, reserves the divine spark, the essential infinity of human prospect this being of light incarnates. Your unbending blade protects the vessel housing divinity. Mine prepares the cup for the soul's continuity. Understand the division, your sword warding flesh and bone, my entire self expended for the spirit holding eternity. Mounting the incalculable wearing evidence etched his very being. Reports smuggled past censors by palace chirurgeons to private archives speak volumes through terrified observation. nosebleeds dark as prophecy staining scribbled annotations, tremors shaking the parchment even as Malcador himself shook under unseen pressures, debris tumbling beneath psychic strain. Moments of disorientation where ancient eyes became glaciers suddenly adrift. Terrifying progressive deterioration, visible to attendants sworn to silence lines, deepening from mental trenches. Fragile silver creeping further into dimming gray workshop of perpetual regeneration. Should these reports be trusted, crumbled, suborned by perilous effort, overwhelming immortal foundations, overwhelming them irrespective of all biological permanence. Despite this accumulating personal shroud, Malcador remained the Empire's functioning heart, thinner and trembling with exhaustion pacing corridors, echoing constant detonation, impacts coordinating commanders retreating meter by blasted meter. Shifting resources chuff sublunar depots like fragmenting spume shifting constantly against relentless crushing pressure. Issuing twisted directives concerning water-short captives crammed subterranean amidst seismic booming building towards final descent. Amidst profound hellfire engagements, scarring the orbital spires bleeding relentless war, then hammering upon titanic external fortifications before finally infiltrating cracked superstructure, aligned to planned annihilation. Malcador's vital ghost war screamed perpetually. Phalanxes of Voruda agents trained specifically against subjective psychosasm, log actuator manifestation, report determined coordinated offensives, fathomless cunning, engineered bending air and stone and time itself. These weren't mere assaults. Sophisticated assaults sought specifically unravel ontological geometries defining actuality, surrounding the imperial throne for Getek threatening immediate rupture, opening gateways, vomiting triune predations, straight through physical dimensions, catastrophic breach, unleashing ultimate chaos directly onto catalyst catastrophe spacetime fabric entryway, located Emperor forcing Malcador, previously unseen personal confrontation nodes, extreme danger moments, surging savage unmatched chaotic energy. Annihilation primaries, violently attempting shattering etheric containment, demanded massive response, include inherent counters against colossal effort entirely in addition, desperately draining, affect maintaining dynasties, weakening astronomic and slicing darkness, provide galactic lifeline emperor, could no longer fuel diverting all into collapsing webway breach counterintelligence, desperately vanished most specialized battle zone telepaths, locky substructures, essential psychic artillery, explosive relief. Pressure allows Sigillite undertake defense catastrophic concentrations, unleashed unclean energies deflected by Malcador alone capacity, withstand mentally fortify, repairing damaged architecture ethereal constant attrition. Memos sealed highest classification detail Sigillite, suffering physical degradation, instantaneous alignment. With Spike's traitor advance obvious concerted multidimensional synchronization, attempt, overwhelm psychic shielding, translate battlefield gains permanent reality weakening. Medical reports discovered Medivault archives contain chilling notation. Subsequent intense engagement conference ingestion increased precipitous. Also detected transient molecular disruption signatures, implying cellular fraying at foundational systemic level unimaginable stress. Placed unfiltered exposure raw warp forces, fundamentally tearing immortality protections, unraveling uniqueness being eternity self-consuming, exhaust fundamental perpetual constants. Horus forced apocalyptic confrontation, lowering void shields, monstrous vengeful spirit looming, above corrupted Terran atmosphere. Final gambit invitation direct confrontation, cataclysmic narcissism, bearing personal rematch, hallowed grim solemnity emperor, resolved honor destruction of sanguineous answering challenge, forming teleporter strike formation solution, contained impossible contradiction, paramount indefensible repository, throne mechanism primary failure containment, breach webway portal cascade horrors, spill obliterate holy sanctum imperialis, destroying impossible thousands, world's atrocious reality. Defeating Horus Anyway system, compromise totality, collapse certain impossible decision. Suspended above abyss Malcador, already physically white ash mode trembling exhausted foresee crucial horror potential. Realized absolute terms, aware eternal agony. Yet, when Emperor requested throne maintain moment duties spoken, without hesitation guarantee containment Malcador, immediately occupied circuitry, blasted conduit, interwoven tortured consciousness functioning, instantly accepting plight knowing. Existence measured agony eventual consumption. Connection recorded cold technical precision, chronometric report 0, 827 Terran stand. Emperor monitoring stasis, barely contained awaiting departure momentary stability. Assured tactical departure confirmed 0, 8. 30 Malcador confined alone battling totality unreality containment. Statistics acceptable parameters grim data betrayed nothing lived reality sheer monstrosity. Undertaking biomass readings. Plummeting exponentially psychic comportment, immediately shattering feedback loops. Inflicting torment screaming silent psychotechnicians, millennia later postulated horrific. Calculation effort equating singular mind, concurrently fending planetary scale war predation, whilst combat determining greater demonic intellect, exquisite wrath simultaneously, beyond feasible theoretical limits, strained Malcador, exhausted already conceptually breaking boundaries, endurance conceivable suppressing torment, long outside mortality comprehension. Custodian check logs hourly increasingly despairing progressive collapse basic bodily structural integrity cellular cohesion, violently violated raw energetic bleed molecular bonds, fracturing appearing translucently crisp flaking edges, tortured expression, frozen, contained absolute focus sensed concentration, fortress guarding obliteration, immaculate despite, atomized being searing sequentially endured unspeakable torment specified 7 to 6 hours sources, dispute number range 78. Margins scholarly uncertainties irrelevant empirical observation emperor, fatally sundered return body, still impressed upon control configuration throne Malcador, persisted entirely physical spectrum, evaporating endless agony perfection efficiency tide, contained defied madness, excruciating final moments, relayed stark precision, dorn supreme architect, ultimate fortress mercy witnessed end, describing act godlike compassion, Sigillite transferred discarded husk crumbles dust motes. Dissolution holding shape brief transferred residual vitality, depowered emperor enabling critical conscious utterance motivation survival form, followed inevitable directives, sealed future preserve hopelessness, prevented perpetual throne existence essential, for humanity's continued existence Malcadors, sacrifice ultimate embodiment, guiding light absolute price personal extinction necessary, shepherd cradle civilization forwards, burning his eternal unique self-perpetuity, consumed guaranteeing. Single-day existence, those unknowingly protected unknowing gravitas motive power, enough fueled 10,000 ages decay Malcador, revealed critical principle absolute service ultimate truth, even paradoxically institutions protecting legacy, formed secretually designed, genetic designated agents, prepared concealed Saturnine moon titan, manifested precisely death concealment field, dissolving, revealing fully functional cathedral fortress, contain prepared specialized protectorate. Potent genocide barracks, aligned augment protocol standardized ordinal role equipment, tactica, imperative contrition, chapter Grey Knights recruitment, initiated profound secrecy armory standardization, indoctrination protocols, enabling startling deployment guerrilla formation, hunting hellspawn fundamental tenets laid Malcador's groundwork, executed flawlessly circumstances apocalyptic shambles galaxy, burnt marrow corruption spreading containment, established instantly conversely. Inquisitorial framework, emerged foundations, obscure protocols observing infiltration, treason ready assemble, fragmented Imperium, overarching characteristics accuracy, Malcador vision heinous methodologies, employed necessary complex calculations, contradict vengeful justice sacrifices, demanded countless innocence, preservation futures, blameless shielding, paradoxical guardian extreme knowledge, selectively feigned ignorance architect, unified governance architect, enduring secrecy. Concentrated power, unaccountable hands, structure, danger, demanding admission, profound contradiction within Sigillite consciousness, compassionate, hopeful vision, enabling liberated humanity, ascending manipulated, engineered, winnowed, consigned oblivion thoughtfully, unknowing, collateral, essentially unavoidable blood, price his constant choice, shaped history paid, chosen far disposability, others paid greatest coin, impossible personal sacrifice, fulfilled utterly completed service unification, conceived impossible. Birth-born unity, preserved personally besieged broken moments, preserved possibility existence history, masters intricate paradox dedication, Mystifying, inspiring, causing, killed, saved, justified, lingering shadow, cold reflection, absolute devotion, potential, transcends morality, endured sacrifices, accepted sacrifices, demanded, proved, lasting consequence, inscribed ash, scattered, swiftly founding structures, enduring genesis, gray nights, grim agents, hunting, inevitable darkness, acceptance, profound. Sacrifice, severe necessity, measure, humanity, Malcador, demonstrated, resolve, transcended time, consequence, fulfilling ancient compact, even costing last breath, cherished existence, eternal sleep, exceeding values, comprehension, ensured continued fight, tomorrow, oblique, sufficient glory, heritage, judged, harsh necessity, legacy, both darkness, shield, light, inextricably, bound, human, future, purchased, agonizing, collapse, consuming, perpetual spark, guaranteed, imperishable, stubborn, survival itself, supreme. Contribution, sacrifice, absolute, fulfilled, eternal promise, guarded, hopefully, grim success, inverted psalm, litany, resignation, duty, cost, Malcador, held line, burned, safeguarding, tomorrow, perhaps dark, challenging, sustained alone, knowing, ultimate price, already signed, binding contract, eternity, distant, past, fulfilled, blinding, self-immolation, moment necessary, end, witness, eternity, conserved, remember, sacrifice, impossible depths, defied, understanding, forms, foundation, stand upon. Forevermore, certainty, choice, obeyed, relentlessly, utterly, completely. This paradox, doubtless, eternally interrogated, rarely resolved, cold echoes, travails, enduring, perpetuated, gray, actually embodied contradictions, resolve, pragmatism, vision, intertwined, forever characterizing, protective, goth, destined, endure, immense burden carried, incredibly shoulders, humbling remembrance, obligated, imbibe, courage, bleakest hours, grim resolve, preserved necessity, creates eternal legacy, impossibly demanding, timeless, symbolic incarnation, ultimate sacrifice, repeated countless degrees. Every one hazard, humanity, remember, foundation, stones, essential, endurance, costly beyond despair, accepted, totally, chosen freely. What truly set Malcador apart from the host of similarly pragmatic figures littering imperial annals was his profound, almost supernatural lack of personal ambition. For millennia, from the blood-wrenched shadows of the Unification Wars to the galaxy-shattering conflagration of the Heresy, no credible shard of evidence surfaced to suggest he ever craved dominion for its own sake or basked in the glittering lure of personal renown. His focus was singular, diamond-hard, and chillingly consistent, a deep-seated determination to ensure the survival of humanity itself within a cosmos teeming with unspeakable threats. This imperative consumed him utterly, regardless of the crushing personal cost or the echoing silence that was his portion instead of glory. In the ultimate analysis, Malcador's paramount legacy lay embodied in the very persistence of the Imperium, its ragged, breathing existence throughout 10,000 years. The vast, labyrinthine institutions he meticulously seeded, nurtured, and set like clockwork mechanisms into motion have, over countless centuries, identified looming shadows of oblivion and methodically, ruthlessly extinguished them. The administrative scaffolds he designed, bone-weary structures of record and ordnance, have preserved an unbroken continuity, functioning amidst the apocalyptic convulsions that rocked age after age as empires fell. The bedrock strategic principles he instilled insane depth to absorb monstrous blows before they struck the vital heart, institutional redundancy that ensured no single failure meant annihilation, intricate webs of contingency, planning for evils he could only dimly foresee. These had each, time and again, proven essential sinews tethering the Imperium to life as horrific crisis avalanched upon it. If the mighty emperor was rightly venerated as the towering father of the Imperium, its divine progenitor and wellspring of terrifying power, then Malcador deserved unequivocal recognition as its fundamental architect. Where the emperor illuminated possibility, a blinding solar flare awakening faith and fanatical devotion through sheer transcendent force, Malcador built, brick by painstaking brick, wall by reinforced wall, his work defined by patient, clockwork method. Where the emperor commanded the heavens through raw, charismatic authority that shook stars, Malcador guided the machine from within, hidden among its cogs and levers, his true direction manifest through institutional blueprints and the subtle, decisive pull of unseen wires. In those haunting words ascribed to Constantin Valdor, whispered like sacred ash in the awful aftermath of the siege itself, the emperor's radiant brilliance illuminated the destiny. the sacred path stretching towards a promised Imperium. Yet the Emperor did not build the road. It was Malcador whose silent toil and sacrifice laid the gritty, enduring stones upon which staggering, weary humanity would stumble forward for millennia thereafter. 10,000 tormented years later, that vital road remained, though weathered deep by suffering, cracked and heaved by the tremors of endless war and decay. Still, a fractured humanity shuffled its weary feet upon it, generation upon generation. This persistence, this stubborn, battered passage onwards, stood as perhaps the purest, most unassailable testament to the unquenchable legacy of Malcador, that rare hero who left no monument save a crumbling path through oblivion. The very last ember of dusk had long since died upon the bruised horizon when adept historian Vogel finally laid his quill to rest. The labor of the day, at least for this soul, was concluded. His shoulders groaned beneath an ache so deeply settled it felt fused with bone, while the harsh, unwavering glow of his illuminator seemed etched upon his very vision. Flickering afterimages danced before him now with every weighted blink, ghostly snakes coiling against darkened lids. Outside his narrow viewport, utter blackness had devoured the chaotic landscape, scarifying New Ithaca's surface. The weary lights of habitat settlement Tertius were completely erased, swallowed whole by the furious cascade drumming now with martial precision against his outpost's adamantium shell. Only the violent staccato bursts of lightning, far out across the peaks, ever broke through the voided sky, revealing for a single, frozen heartbeat the jagged silhouettes of mountains, like the spine of a colossal, slumbering beast against a midnight canvas utterly starless and deep. Vogel's hands, skin parchment thin and deeply lined, moved through the practiced rhythm of preservation with a quiet certainty that came of lifetimes spent beneath stacks of paper. Fine sifting dust spilled like silver sand across the dark ink river of his scripted thoughts. A gentle tilt sent the excess cascading back to its clay pot. Pages, fragile and heavy with meaning, were gathered into the nest of a worn leather folio. It cracked under his touch like old skin as he sealed it with a tiny brass lock, a fragile gesture against time's devouring teeth, more symbol than safeguard, yet ceremony demanded it. This frail vessel of secrets was then nestled deep within a drawer beneath his battered desk, a gaining nesting box protected by a far more substantial lock, whose cold kiss bore the starkly final, miniature skull insignia of Inquisition approval that always chilled Vogel's blood just a little when his knuckle brushed against it. The harsh song of rain provided the only counterpoint now, as he dimmed the Lumaglobe's fierce heart to a mere ember, painting the cramped vault of his cell-like chamber in shifting tides of deep shadow and weak, failing light. Everything changed within that twilight gloom. Shelves laden with rotting tomes shifted into looming monoliths guarding forgotten realms. The small, austere shrine to the silent emperor, tucked into the corner, became a darker, more judgmental presence. Even the ancient cogitator slumbering nearby seemed a brooding automaton, its slumberland machine spirit requiring daily oil and prayer benedictions just to coax it into fractious life each morning. Now, in this fragile dark, it radiated a latent, watchful awareness. Vogel's forgotten cup of recaf sat cold and skull-like on the desk edge, a grim sludge forming a skin upon its black surface. He carried it to the narrow wash basin recessed into the cold rockcrete wall, its ceramic scarred by generations of scouring. Beneath the surface-curtained plastisteel, pipes coughed and shuddered beneath the floor like indigestive deep-earth beast, and the water that spurted forth tainted always that peculiar, faintly metallic tang of Ithaca, splashed cool and startlingly clarifying across his fingers. He raised the precious liquid to his weathered face, scrubbing away the grit of crumbling history and the clinging fatigue that settled like dust after a day lost down the wormholes of the past. Above the basin, the small, polished reflection surface offered not Vogel, but a stranger. Deep canyons mapped his face, etched by time and the unforgiving lights of scholarship. Wisps of thinning, white hair framed features splattered with the brown signatures of senescence. His eyes, receded into shadowed sockets like those of some weathered gargoyle, still held a core of fierce, brittle fire, the unkillable spark of the scholar's purpose. Did the young, zealous soul who had first crossed the threshold of the Lexicanum depths still reside within this rusting physical shell? He rarely recognized him now. A soft, crystalline chime from the wall chronometer marked the advent of the midnight hour. Deep within the outpost's subterranean pumping guts, massive systems paused, shifted, recalibrated with metallic sighs and persistent gurgles as recyclers contended with the day's collected waste. The entire structure settled around him then, arthritically groaning and shifting its immense bulk, like a great servodraft beast folding itself down onto frigid flagstones, seeking a few hours of uneasy slumber. Vogel retreated towards the minimal sanctuary of the sleeping alcove, its scant privacy curtained by a sheer, faded drape of imperial gray that smelled faintly of stone dust and salt rock. The narrow cot offered only a thin mattress, rancid foam peeking through worn weave. What once felt like punitive asceticism now beckoned him with the profound, carnal promise of respite for long-suffering bones. Changing was a meticulous ritual. His historian's robes, heavy with the scent of paper dust and ancient ink, were folded into perfect, reverent squares military precision born from lifelong duty and stowed in the shallow tomb of the compartment beneath his cot. From around his neck, suspended against his frail chest by a simple chain, he drew a small silver pendant, a twin-headed aquila, symbol of imperial might, grasping a fragile, clasped book in its talons, the everyday icon of the Adeptus Administratum division to which the Lexicanum Imperialis and Vogel himself were forever bonded. This tiny emblem he placed with gentle reverence upon the rickety bedside table. Beside it stood the captured essence in a small hologram, a woman's calm face, her inscribed name on the baseberry weeping away with time, and one he hadn't dared pronounce aloud in 3 desolate decades, fraught with the pain of what duty demanded he leave behind. The final observances, sacred, pungent unguent smeared onto aching temples, the murmured, rhythmic drone of the litany of daily accounting, all 97 words acknowledging the God Emperor's all-seeing gaze and his historian's sacred, crushing duty. To record the fractured truth solely as it served the pitiable survival of humankind, no matter how dark that tale might grow. As he eased his brittle frame down onto the protesting cot, the ligaments snapping like dry twigs, Vogel's bleary gaze drifted across to the manuscript case holding the bones of tomorrow's scholarly excavation. Its label, inscribed in a quick, bold script entirely unlike his own careful hand. Ms. Protocols, Terror Mobilization Orders Pre-Heresy. Another shard of wreckage. Another day's heavy footfall on the endless journey into the mind of the Emperor's right shadow, into the intellect and soul of Malcador. Outside, the drumming rain performed its relentless percussion against the outpost walls, a natural rhythm ingrained into his sleeping self through countless nights. Faintly, beneath it all like the respiration of a god, thunder rolled its bass profundity across the distant peaks. The immense sound was a dreadful, comforting reminder that amidst the desperate, tearful struggles of humanity, its grand cosmic stature, pleading into the dark the elemental world endured in awe-inspiring, utterly uncaring magnificence. What dreams did you weave, Malcador? Vogel breathed the silent question into the profound quiet around him as he pulled the course regulation blanket over his wasted shoulders, the scratchy woolly companion known longer than most friends. Did you glimpse, even for a moment, the galaxy-spanning colossus your design had birthed? Could you possibly have measured the incalculable toll it would exact? Such questions, hauntingly resonant, would remain unanswered as they had persisted for the full 10 bloody millennia, lockstepped with the Imperium's existence. The old historian's eyelids dragged heavily downwards, the sheer tidal weight of accumulated years and drowning knowledge compressing down upon his weary spirit. Suspended in that fleeting, liminal zone clinging between fading consciousness and the deep relief of slumber, Vogel sometimes fancied he could feel the spectral press of presence around Hema, silent congregation of the innumerable scholars, archivists, and scribes who had walked this arduous path before him. Each had dedicated their singular heartbeat of existence to clawing back a single, knuckle-sized fragment of truth from the all-devouring maw of mythology. An old man finding solace only in script and dust. A question surfaced then: would he, one day and centuries hence, be nothing more than just such a fragment himself? Would a similarly time-worn historian, seated at a similar scarred desk on some light-forsaken world light-years distant, labor to reassemble the puzzle of Thaddeus Vogel from scattered data slugs and crumbling lists? The fleeting image ghosted a small, wry smile across his lips. And then, silence descended deep and profound save for the eternal grieving lament of the rain against the rockreat skin of his fortress tomb. and the soft, stuttering rasp of an ancient man breathing his last conscious breath before sliding into dreams saturated with rusted heroes and longer-raised truths. While all around him, the gargantuan, unforgiving machinery of the Imperium heaved, strained, and ground inexorably onward through the suffocating night. As it had since those ashes of Malcador, the hero first turned cold upon the golden throne.